Hello, everyone. It's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, I have an amazing guest. Lauren Steiner, host of Robust Opposition. She has been on this show multiple times, and she is a close friend of the show, as far as I can tell. Lauren, please tell everyone hello.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And it's so fun to be on with you when you're in Europe.
I know, right? It's like traveling around the world, traveling show. Um, how are you? I'm gonna start with saying, how are you first? How's things going? I know you're working on Robust Opposition. And you gave me a show on, what is this guy named Bonham? You call him
Bauman.
Bauman, right?
Eric Bauman.
So he's being toppled. Can you explain a little bit about that? Because I was watching that and I was blown away by this. He's abusing people, molesting others. This is utterly fascinating. And he finally takes, I guess, when people started making complaints, he decides to step away. Could you explain what happened?
Well, I don't really think the decision was his because, when this scathing article came out in the LA Times, where actually one of his victims decided to go on the record and use his own name, at that point it was untenable. I mean, Gavin Newsom, the newly elected governor, called for his resignation. Others in the state party called for his resignation. And he was going to try to tough it out because he's a tough guy. That's why I call him Boss Bauman. He first became known to me at a Bernie Hillary debate watch party in November of 2015. And I asked a simple question and he, went down my throat. Not literally, but basically he was talking about, he was holding court, if you will. He was holding forth with his opinions about how the debate went. And he was contrasting it with the Republican debates, the clown cars, they used to call it, and saying how civilized it was. But he felt that the moderator was maybe being a little too tough on Hillary or something like that. And I said, well, to be fair, I agree with you. I started out at a point of agreement. I said, I agree with you that, the tenor of the debate was, heads above the others, the Republicans. But she does have a right to try to discern the differences between the two candidates, especially since Hillary has now adopted so many of Bernie's policies. And that must have set him off because he then said, well, I disagree with you and, and Hillary's going to win this thing and blah, 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 blah. And I don't want to get into this with you. And, I could take you to the toes on this. And I never even heard that expression, take you to the toes, but it sounded like he wanted to meet me in the parking lot for a fight or something. And so then, and the worst thing was the crowd was mostly pro Bauman because he's got a lot of, we can call them Bauman boys, if you will, like Bernie bros, there's Bauman boys. And they were there and they're like, yeah, right. And, it felt to me like it was some sort of boxing match. And then I don't know why I stopped taping, but I did. And at that point, he comes around the table, he gets in my face, he jabs his finger in my face, calls me honey, curses me out, accuses me of bully tactics. And my friend who was with me had to put his arm in between us. And then Bauman goes, what are you doing? I wasn't going to hit her. But it felt that way. So at that point, I
wasn't going to hit her is a little extreme in and of itself, right? I mean, the fact that for you to say, I am not going to hit her gives an impression that somebody thought you were going to hit her. Like that's such a bizarre thing to have to say, that your discourse and the way that you're engaging with somebody makes somebody else thinks, oh my God, he's going to,
Exactly. And that's what he is. And he had been the chair of the LA County Democratic Party for like 9 years or something like that. He started out as a nurse. He was an organizer in the nurses union, I believe. And then he got into party politics. And then he became the vice chair of the Democratic Party under John Burton, who is also known not so much to be a bully, but he curses a blue streak. I mean, the F word comes out of his mouth every other word. And Bauman, ran a year later. I found out that he was running for state party chair. And that's how I got involved in the Kimberly Ellis race. Not because I was such a fan of Kimberly Ellis. I had never even heard of her. But when I found out that he was going to, potentially be the chair of my party, I was still in the Democratic Party then. I'm like, no way. And so I kind of got involved with the Democrats in the party that were supporting Kimberly. And Kimberly was a Hillary person. She was not a Bernie person. But she is very progressive. She is very much of an activist. I actually worked on her campaign. I did some media for her and kind of dubbed her the activist candidate for state party chair. And it was really more, I have to say, out of just what had happened to me. And I made a video. Here's what he did. Some of this talk was kind of like the best kept secret, that he was very bawdy. Oh, the other thing I should tell you is he's gay. And he's openly gay. So there is what is called the gay mafia in California Democratic Party.
The gay mafia?
Yeah, there's like,
What?
I know. And that's supposed to be, I'm arguing with people whether that's a slur or whether that's not a slur, because it's like, what it just definitely means is that there are people with high positions in the Democratic Party. Ricardo Lara, who was running for insurance commissioner. I forgot to find out whether he won or Steve Poizner won. That's very interesting. But he was the one that introduced SB 562, our single payer bill. He's gay. Tony Atkins, who's now the Speaker of the Assembly, she's gay. And so there's a lot of gay leaders in high positions in the California Democratic Party and in the legislature. So Boss Bauman, and I still call him Boss Bauman, there would be social events after political events. And there would be a lot of drinking involved. And what started to come out, I think, was that he got out of hand, with some of the younger staffers and interns. And this was kind of a well-kept secret. And in my show, Alan Acevedo, who's the young man who came out about this, said that it was like people were, it's problematic. And I want to do a whole show on this because in the gay culture, gay men are very overtly sexual. I mean, there's bathhouses, there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's part of the gay culture. So, it seems to be fine in a social situation, but when these are social situations after party functions, and this man is your boss, and you're a young man and you're trying to move up in the party, very much like the Me Too movement. You don't really say anything. And also you don't necessarily know if it's happening to anybody else. So when things are in isolation, that's how they can fester. And we've seen that with a lot of people, whether it's Bill Cosby or Les Moonves now. The stuff that's coming out about him at CBS is really disgusting. But so the woman on my show, Lori Saldana, who's she's a former assemblywoman, Alan had talked to her before the chair's election in early May of 2017. He had worked on her staff and told her of what Bauman did, which he revealed to the LA Times. And so Lori told Duraca, who's the vice chair of the party at that point, and he was like, well, without the guy coming forward, what can I do? And so he knew, Duraca knew, and now there's like in the progressive community and in California, they're talking about whether he now wants to be the chair. And did he reveal this when he revealed it for his own political ends? Mm-hmm. What happened was at the E-Board meeting, November 16th weekend, 2 women, okay, and it takes the women to come forward. There were 2 women, and Bauman asked them if they were gay and if they were having an affair. And if they were, it was okay as long as it didn't affect party business. And they felt really uncomfortable by that question, obviously. So they talked to Duraca, and Duraca then wrote this letter, first on social media, and then it was an email that he sent to all the party delegates, and basically said that he was reporting him, and he was basically recommending that he be removed as chair. So, he immediately issues a statement saying he was happy to have an investigation, And then over the week, the Thanksgiving week, there was all this speculation over whether he would take a leave of absence. We were all calling for him to take a leave of absence while this investigation was occurring, just like Cristina Garcia did. Cristina Garcia is a very high-powered woman in the assembly, and she was basically responsible for outing three assemblymen, for sexual harassment, Bocanegra, Menendez, and Dababne, and they all resigned. So then allegations came forward about her, and the two people who made the allegations were associated with those men that she took down. So everybody thought it was like retribution. But while it was being investigated, she stepped down. So he does decide to step down. And then the very next day, on Tuesday, this article came out. And I was going to have Lori on my show that night anyway to talk about Bauman with some other people. But in the article, Alan was mentioned. So I said, gee, can we get Alan on the show? So she said, yeah. Or she said, I'll reach out to him. And so then he and I spoke over Facebook. He agreed to come on the show. I bumped my other guests, and we did a whole hour on this guy. And that's the situation. Then he resigned, basically, after that article came out. And now there's going to be, in the convention in May, there's going to be a new election to fill out the remainder of his term. And the big mystery is whether Kimberly wants it or not, and if she's going to run. That's what I was going to ask.
Is Kimberly
And I
Ellis
know, but I can't say anything because I had a conversation that I had to keep in total confidence because I protect my sources, so I know so much that I'm sitting on that I can't say.
You know,
but all I can say is, right? if you weren't totally bored by my story, because you're not in California and you don't know any of these people, if you weren't totally bored by my story, stay tuned to my page and my channel because I will be following this ongoing story.
I am going to speculate that the answer is yes, because otherwise there will be no information to sit on. If the answer was no, there wouldn't be any information to sit on. By virtue of saying I have something to sit on, meaning you have something, as opposed to nothing. Like, for example, if Kimberly Ellis said no, then there would be, there's nothing to sit on. There's nothing to hide. There's nothing to, I'm holding in. I can't tell.
Or maybe Kimberly doesn't know yet. Maybe she hasn't decided yet.
Fair enough. I would imagine, though, she has to want it. I mean, the guy she lost to barely in a contested election. I mean, do you honestly believe she lost that election? I heard there was a lot of shenanigans associated with that election.
There were shenanigans, and her team wanted to review these proxy ballots because a lot of elected officials, they're equivalent to the superdelegates on the state level. In other words, they get a vote whether they're involved in the party or not, just by virtue of being an elected official. And also, the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Assembly have delegates that they can that they appoint to the party. So at the convention, I live streamed like 2 days in a row, and I kept trying to get Kevin DeLeon to tell me whether the rumor was true that he had asked his 30 delegates to vote for Bauman. And first I cornered him as he was walking off the stage at the Environmental Caucus. And he was like, my delegates are going to do what they want to do, which was not an answer, So then the next day was when they had the big final vote. And it was like one of the most exciting things I videotaped because everything was in chaos. Kimberly Ellis did not come into the hall. She was going to contest the election because the proxies, what we later found out in the recall was that she wanted to see if the proxies had properly signed their ballots and if they had paid, because these are procedures that you had to follow. And they wouldn't let her check these ballots because they said it was all privacy reasons. So there was some concern as to whether these were even legal votes or not. But there were all the people, the delegates who supported her that had all these points of order, all these proposals they wanted to make. They were trying to make them from the floor. There were 2 microphones set up in this huge hall. And I kept running from one microphone to the other microphone, trying to get the action. And then, me, I'm an activist too. So I'm making suggestions, and you can hear me making suggestions on the stream because like the parliamentarian was saying, oh no, that's not in the rules. So then I'm like, ask him to suspend the rules. Ask him to suspend the rules, And then I'm like telling this other guy because he's trying to say something and they're talking over him. And I'm like, Mic check it, mic check it. And so it was really kind of a fun day. But what happened was the delegates were walking out.
Yeah.
They decided as soon as he came and he started thanking everyone, they were booing him. And then they walked out. And Kimberly Ellis met her delegates in the park and announced, made a little speech and announced what she was thinking of doing. And ultimately, she, she wanted to do an audit of the ballots, which she did do. And, he gained some, she gained some. I don't know that the vote count switched. She had only lost by 62 votes, but it's clearly not a mandate. And a lot of people speculated that's why he resigned so quickly, because he knew he did not have a mandate to be.
He didn't have support.
Yeah.
I'm curious on something else. California has a Democratic supermajority, right?
Yeah.
For the most part, you have a Democratic governor, supermajority. Medicare for all. Now, my understanding of California politics, and I don't have an absolute understanding of it, but there's something within regards to the way California budget is arranged with education, where a certain amount has to be spent on education because of some kind of rule set that you guys have put into place. And so Medicare for all would be difficult to pull off based on the current budget structure. Is that true? Or
well, you're saying something that sounds familiar to me, and I know that was one of the several objections that people had, but there are answers to these objections. And the overall answer, the umbrella answer to that, is there are ways around these things. And I have a specific answer to that I can probably put in the comments of the show after I research it, when you on your YouTube show. But the point is that unless you start the process and introduce it, you're never going to be able to get around any of these objections. And what happened was Ricardo Lara, who, as I mentioned, was running for insurance commissioner, he was endorsed by the nurses union because he introduced the single payer bill, but he never really fully supported it. And I also cornered him when he spoke to the West LA Dem Club about this, because I wanted to know why he wasn't fighting for his bill when Anthony Rendon shelved it. He put it he kept it in the Rules Committee. He wouldn't let it come out of the Rules Committee. And his term was, it was woefully incomplete because it didn't have the financing package. But as a matter of fact, the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, had just done a study which had the financing, the suggested financing. There would be a gross tax, there would be some income tax, there would be a sales tax. I mean, it was a panoply of ways that this thing would be funded. But the bottom line was, the point of introducing something and getting it out of the Rules Committee is so that it can go on through the other committees, the Health Committee, and then to Appropriations, where these things are ironed out. So when it's shelved in Rules, there's no way they can even work on these things. So it was disingenuous. And I actually did with Rendon at right after the March for, is it the March for Our Lives or the Women's March? No, the Women's March. I went to a Women's Political Caucus thing, and I decided I was going to try to get an interview with Rendon, but I wasn't going to do it on the camera because he would never be honest with me. So I kind of turned on my live stream, and I'm like telling the people, okay, I'm going to put the camera down now because I see him. I'm going to go talk to him. So I had it down by my side, and I'm like, can you please tell me, because I've been an activist for single payer since 2004. Can you tell me why you didn't let it come out of the amendments because the nurses union had submitted some amendments, like 19 amendments, and he refused to look at them. And he's like, because he doesn't think he's being recorded, right? So he's like, why don't you, they never submitted those amendments. Why don't you ask them if they submit those amendments? I'm like, okay, I will. He says, no, you're not. I bet you're not. And he was like turning it against me. He was like Bauman. It was like these bully tactics. The same thing. Eric Bauman is bullying me, calling me using bully tactics. And this guy is like twisting it around and making like I am at fault here. So I'm defending myself. I'm going to ask him. Why wouldn't I ask him? I'm going, it's like, meanwhile, he's turned the whole, so then I made a little video about him, right? See, I love doing this. I did this with another guy who, well, anyway, I'm not going to get into that story, but what happened with Rendon was Jerry Brown told him to shelve that bill. He said, don't present a bill, don't put a bill on my desk and that I'm going to embarrass me to have to veto.
Right.
because Jared Brown became against single payer. But, you know, somebody unearthed, and I actually worked for him in 92. I was his media advisor on his presidential campaign when he was progressive, and he supported single payer. And there's a YouTube video of him on Phil Donahue, or maybe it was C-SPAN, I can't remember, basically debating Bill Clinton and Jerry saying single payer is the only way to go. So he got all conservative over the course, you know, of the last 25 years. He's completely gone conservative, and he won't ban fracking because he's got ties to the oil industry. And speaking about education, the Western States Petroleum Association said that they would not come out against his Prop 30, which was more money for schools. That he was very good on. They would not come out against his Prop 30 if he would agree not to ban fracking. So all the people, Californians Against Fracking and Oil Money Out and all these different groups that were trying to lobby him to ban fracking and, you know, go to his every appearance with signs that say climate leaders don't frack, including interrupting his appearance in Europe. I forget the country that he was in, and because he wants to have a legacy as a climate leader. And yet he can't do that because he's approved 20,000 new wells in California, onshore and offshore. So it's a big joke when he talks about how he's going to get his attorney general to stop Trump from drilling offshore when California, in federal waters, when the state is already drilling offshore in state waters and has, you know, 5 times more wells than Trump even wanted to drill in federal waters. So he's like this big hypocrite. And, you know, everybody thought they were going to affect him by protesting him, but he's an iconoclast. He really doesn't care what anybody says about him. But they were thinking, well, he wants to have this legacy as a climate leader, and the sign climate leaders don't frack. But all the while I was saying we should be trying to get a pledge out of Gavin Newsom, because I was pretty sure he was going to win. You know, we should say we're not going to endorse him. We're going to work against him unless he pledges. And they didn't put any attention into that. So now we don't even really know where he stands.
What Newsom's going to do. Well, Newsom has come out saying that he wants single payer, but it's a worthy goal to work for. But it's not necessarily going to be something where he's just going to sign.
Right.
Which guts what he was saying earlier in the campaign, that he was going to push for single payer. Well, the nurses put his face on the bus. You know.
The nurses endorsed him 2 years before the election, which I thought was premature based on the fact that he would be their champion. And even during the campaign, he started to backtrack from it to the point where they had to push him out, put him out front and say, no, I'm committed to single payer. But, you know, there are a lot of obstacles. But like I said, if you don't start the process and start to work to overcome the obstacles, you're never going to get it. Now, we can have a reasonable policy debate on whether the states are the way to go. And I have a whole video that I conducted with Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers. And Kevin is a huge activist. Margaret and he are now involved. You know, they're a couple politically and romantically, but they met through activism. She was an internist who gave up being a doctor to be a single payer advocate. Wow. She was the one kicked out of the Max Baucus hearings. I think it was 2004. I might be wrong. No, 2009, when Obama was having the hearings on Obamacare. And she came in there with Carol Paris, because they're both in Physicians for National Health Care. They came in there and disrupted because they wanted to know why there was no single payer advocate at the table. And they hauled him out of there. So ever since then, she's been really fighting for single payer. And they made a very good case to me at a single payer conference I covered in Florida, the same trip where I covered Tim Canova's announcement where he was leaving the Democratic Party. They made a really good case to me about why it's best to do it nationally.
Yes.
You know, and I gave him the argument. I said, well, look, in Canada, you know, they started with Saskatchewan, first that province and then all the other provinces. And they gave me a whole list of reasons, which I can't recall off the top of my head, why.
States have to balance their budgets. The federal government doesn't. I mean, that's the main reason I come up with. I mean, if the federal government, like, for example, the California budget issue, like you said, there were ways to get around the California budget, which, you know, it's just attention. But at the end of the day, California has to balance its budget. The United States government does not. from a federal standpoint, the federal government can, there could be surges, there could be more, there's more latitude in what the federal budget can do as opposed to what states can do.
Well, I think it also has to do with waivers and whatnot. That was one of the other obstacles, that we would have to get a waiver from the Trump government, and Trump would never give us a waiver. But here's the thing: the big lie that they were saying was that it was going to cost $400 billion or $1 trillion or whatever it was. I'm very bad with numbers.
Billion. The LA Times was $400 billion.
Yeah, and they were saying that's more than the whole budget. Well, in reality, we spend 380 something billion on healthcare already through the various programs that could be consolidated. And the other thing is, as far as the individual's budget, the individual would end up spending less in the taxes that they would pay than they're currently spending on premiums, co-pays, and deductibles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, except I think for people who are making more than $250,000 a year, they may make more, but pay more. But for your average homeowner, I think would say, you're a homeowner, your average individual would save, I think it was like about $1,500 a year, and your average business would save about $3,000 a year.
Wow.
So, yeah, so it's definitely the way to go. And what's going to be interesting to see now, and maybe we could pivot to discussion of Congress and AOC and the Congressional Progressive Caucus and how they're affecting Nancy Pelosi, because I took a lot of shit for not opposing Nancy Pelosi more. But my point was, there was no one more progressive running. Barbara Lee was not running. She wanted to be this head of the caucus, and nobody support, all the progressives that were pushing her for leader, which she didn't even want to be, speaker. They could have been pushing her for the actual job that she did want. And she lost to this Hakeem Jeffries, who's like a neo-lib, right? So Nancy Pelosi, and even AOC, who I think is very strategic, she was saying, tweeting, if there is no more progressive running, then I'm going to support her. And then all the AOC detractors on the left were like, oh, yeah, see how she's capitulating and compromising? It didn't take long for that, and knocking poor AOC, who I think is really quite brilliant. And every action that she's done since she's been elected has been advancing our cause to, including marching with the Sunrise Movement. And I'm going to have the head of that organization on my show soon, to convince Nancy Pelosi to reconstitute the Select Committee on Climate Change. And now getting all these other people to sign the pledge for the Green New Deal. But I'm only hoping that in working on, that they can work on more of the progressive platform, that it's not, even though climate change is the most important thing, that we don't forget about single payer too, because I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
I agree with you on that. The AOC thing, that one, I like AOC. And I know there's some people who are detractors who, I forgive people who are detractors on this, because they're detractors because they've been abused before. This is one of those things of, you've been beaten with the frying pan, and now you flinch a little bit every time somebody raises one.
Yeah.
There's been no accountability for the past 30, 40 years from the standpoint of democratic politics. The left, I always say, has been a politically abused spouse of the Democratic Party. And it is now, for the first time in a very long time, where you have a very loud contingent that is asserting itself and is looking maybe overtly so, or maybe too animated in holding people accountable. This is like in any kind of war. People who are innocent take a hit sometimes, in which case AOC may actually be trying to do decent things, but she's taking a hit for others' failures. I have issues with the supporting of Nancy Pelosi, even though I understand the logic of it, because it's this Hobbes choice again, where it's like Trump or Clinton. Which one do you want? It's like, do you extricate yourself from the political process and just let the process take hold without you? Or do you lump in with trying to I guess, choose what one person would consider the least worst option? I understand where she's coming from. I do understand where she's coming from. I don't think I dinged her for that. I think I looked at this and say the process is it is a problematic process when you're stuck choosing Nancy Pelosi. Because, Pelosi, she's trying to push through PAYGO. She's not trying to take responsibility for it. She's trying to say that people are forcing my hand. Oh, they're forcing my hand. They're putting my hand behind my back. And this other policy where they're retooling a Republican policy, saying they're not going to raise taxes on the bottom 80%, which is essentially just a Trojan horse in order to prevent Medicare for all. I mean, am I wrong on this? Essentially, they're supporting somebody who's trying to literally prevent the agenda that she campaigned on and that many of the other people who just got to Congress campaigned on. Is that fair?
Well, PAYGO is ridiculous. I don't understand why she feels she has to support that. I mean, whether you believe in modern monetary theory or not, which I do, that we just make money with computer entries. Yeah. And even if you don't believe that, you see that they certainly haven't paid for the wars. They haven't paid for the bank bailouts. They haven't paid for any of the things that they want to do. So I don't know why, and that was under Democrats too. I don't understand why all of a sudden now we're so concerned about this. The deficit is a phony issue. I mean, I remember with Occupy, people said that Occupy didn't do anything because there were no demands. But as a matter of fact, it changed the national conversation away from that phony issue of the debt, which was Obama. Remember, he had that cat food commission. It was the Simpsons Bowles Commission. And basically it was called Cat Food Commission because if it passed, they would decrease Social Security and senior citizens would have to be going back to eating cat food again. Yeah. So that was a committee. I followed that very closely on a blog that no longer exists called Fire Dog Lake. That was Jane Hampshire's blog. And I
remember that.
Yeah.
That's so familiar to me. That name's familiar to me.
So Alan Simpson was this crazy Republican right-wing senator, and Erskine Bowles was a Clinton new Democrat, centrist Democrat. So there was nobody on the left. And actually Becerra, who I later protested because he wasn't quick enough to come out against TPP fast track, which he ultimately did, Becerra and Jan Schakowsky prevented those recommendations from getting adopted. And here's how sneaky Obama is, if you don't remember this. They didn't say they were going to cut Social Security. What they said was they were going to change the index by which the increases were based on, from the cost of living index. Well, no, to the cost. The COLA. It was called the cost of living index. From the COLA to the chained CPI. So again, this is so wonkish. From the COLA to the chained CPI. But that was actually an index that would have caused the benefits to decline. So this is the first time since FDR that entitlements, if you want to call them that, which is, I don't think they should be called that. I don't
like that term, but yeah, right. I know what you mean.
Benefits would be cut, and they would have been cut under a Democratic president, Obama. Yeah. So he had, as advisors to that commission, he had people from the Peterson Foundation. And Pete Peterson, who was the head of the Blackstone Group, the one now that has the largest corporate landlord in America, because they bought up all the foreclosed homes for a song, and now they're renting them out. And we're protesting them and Equity Residential here in Los Angeles because they're constantly evicting tenants, raising rates, not doing repairs, et cetera, because they're trying to extract more profits from their rental properties. And they've also done, a lot of people don't know this, they've securitized the rental agreements and sold them off. In the same way Wall Street securitized the mortgages, remember, which is what caused the housing crash.
I remember.
So the Pete Peterson was head of the Blackstone Group, and he's had a lifelong mission, 30 years, to destroy Social Security. And he started a foundation. And his foundation is like the equivalent of a right-wing think tank. So they churn out all this, academic reporting on, why the debt is bad, why the deficit is bad. And at the time, I also remember posting about this. The Washington Post started to run articles with the byline, "The Fiscal Times." And they made it out like it was this independent news service that wrote about economics, when in fact it was a project of the Peterson Foundation.
Wow.
Yes. And then it turns out that Obama's cat food commission were using as advisors to that commission people who worked for the Peterson Foundation. So you see, most Americans don't know this because they're too busy working 2 or 3 jobs just to stay afloat, which is why we need independent media and why we need net neutrality and why we need to do something about Facebook because, you know, I'm in Facebook jail like most of every month. I mean, just the other day, I got out of it. I started posting my show about organizing for Bernie. I got an exclusive interview with Rich Peltier, who is the, you know, former deputy campaign manager for the Bernie's campaign.
And now he's,
yeah. So I start posting this in groups, and I posted in 25 groups, and then I'm blocked again, you know? And so it's like, and you know, they purged 800 Facebook pages, many of which were legitimate left-wing
anti-war pages. Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, they were purging pages at the behest of the Israeli government, or just governments in general that didn't particularly like certain pages. But yeah, anti-war pages.
Well, they have Facebook has the Atlantic Council vetting fake news. The Atlantic Council, who has Henry Kissinger, Michael Hayden, what's the other guy? You know, all these former, you know, right, exactly, on their board. And this is who Facebook has used to vet fake news.
So this gets back to the supporting of Nancy Pelosi. If this seems to be a choice where, I guess I don't like this choice. And because I don't like this particular choice, I voted for Joe Stein. I didn't necessarily want to be a part to, you know, you cheated my guy. The last thing I'm going to do is turn around and vote for you after you cheated my guy. I kind of look at it the same way. My policy, my basic policy is you support the person who you believe is representing your interests. Now, I understand Sanders and Ocasio, they're in a political space, so their perspective on this is probably a little different. And nobody is going to get to Congress and then not take their first vote, which meaning, you know, she has to vote for somebody. But, you know, this kind of gets back to Obama was trying to cut Social Security. And Nancy Pelosi is trying to pass PAYGO. And I would say she's trying to pass PAYGO for the very specific reasons of preventing lefty policy from taking place. That way she can stand back and say, look, the rules say X. She doesn't necessarily have to say no, but the rules themselves say no based on, it's like in Britain. Jeremy Corbyn was going to vote against whatever Theresa May put up. Didn't matter what she put up. It could have came with, you know, sprinkles and lollipops. But he doesn't necessarily want to say, I'm voting against this because that seems capricious. What he will say is, we have 7 points that we need to abide by. And if it meets our 7 standards, we'll do it. Now, the catch is the 7 standards is going to fail. There's no way. The whole point of the whole 7 standards is so you can have a certain degree of distance from the thing to which you want to fail. I'm making the point that Nancy Pelosi's PAYGO and the not raising taxes on 80% has that exact same function. The goal of it is to stop lefty policy. She knows that just like the Republican Party had this kind of Tea Party, that they're considered this the left-wing version of the Tea Party coming in, that's somewhat of an activist party. And she does not want to deal with the political flack of having to continuously say no or block those efforts. However, if you put through a policy that blocks those efforts, then she doesn't necessarily have to say no. The policy itself blocks it. It's almost like a third person blocking something as opposed to like a disembodied no.
Yeah, but that can cut 2 ways using the example that I gave before, which is any defense budgets. You know, then they're going to have to pay for the defense budgets. Or if they want to continue the subsidy for fossil fuel companies, they're going to have to pay for that. So, you know, the progressive wing can use that to their advantage. Now, I'm going to have Pramila Jayapal on my show. She basically said she would do my show, and I want to save that till January because, you know, everybody's kind of preoccupied now with the holidays. But she has extracted a lot of concessions out of Pelosi, and she's going to talk about what those are. And I know that AOC is doing the same thing too. One, she got her to reconstitute that committee, the Select Committee on Climate Change. And the other thing that the press has been writing about is she is gunning for a spot on the Ways and Means Committee, which is a very important, powerful committee. And never has a freshman congresswoman, much less someone 28 years old, been put immediately on that committee. So if she can get that, to me, it's all worth it. Because Nancy Pelosi's on her way out. I really believe, like Dianne Feinstein, this is her last hurrah. And one thing she is good at, and you have to give her credit for this, is she can corral the votes. She is a very good whip. She's very good with the procedure. And if we, the people, can pressure our representatives enough, I firmly believe this, and Bernie says it all the time, politicians don't lead, they follow. So social movements have to get strong enough where they are going to be pressuring their representative to then in turn pressure Pelosi. And then she's now following. So, you know, we're going to be doing this in California. I'm involved with the California Progressive Alliance, which is Gail McLaughlin's successor organization to her campaign for lieutenant governor. She was very smart. When she campaigned for lieutenant governor, she went up and down the state encouraging people to start progressive alliances like the one she was in Richmond.
Yeah.
And a lot of communities have done that. So what's happening now is we're starting this progressive alliance statewide. And we're going to do things that I had hoped the progressive Democrats who had taken over, well, not taken over, but we got 600 seats 2 years ago in the Assembly District delegate elections. And there's another round coming up in January. So we got these 600 seats, but people didn't realize that those are only 1/3 of the seats, because the other third are county committee people and the other third are these elected officials. So the ones, even though we had 2/3 of the elected seats, we did not have the majority. So we've been able to make some changes by getting people in certain committees like the Rules Committee. And we've gotten 2 rules that we want to have changed. And yet the problem with being in the party, even with these delegates, is they're jockeying for position, you know, and they all have political aspirations too. Many of them took up Bernie's call to run for office. Yeah. So once you get in there, you get kind of cautious. Whereas the Progressive Alliance is going to be outside the party, and it's going to be anybody from any party can join it. And it's going to be also organizations will be affiliates. So we're going to get, it's going to be issues focused and legislation focused. So like what happened with me is I do my show in August and I find out all these bills that have sailed through the legislature, you know, they've been adopted by every committee and now they're being a vote for the general body. And I'm like, how did these bills get passed? Where were we? We were asleep at the wheel because nobody was focusing on legislation. They're all focusing on elected office. Yeah. So I'm going to be heading up this action team in the California Progressive Alliance on legislation, where we're going to monitor legislation. We're going to adopt legislators, where we're going to have contacts in every representative's office, and we're going to try to encourage them to either kill legislation we don't like or support legislation that we do like. We're also going to write our own legislation, like a Citizens ALEC. So nice. If something, yeah. So, and then we're going to develop a relationship with the people. We're going to have listening tours and town halls in all the districts where we say to the people, what do you want? And utilize that sort of deep canvassing that they're talking about now, instead of like just going to a door and saying, oh, you should support single payer, you should support a ban on fracking. You know, what if they have good health insurance from their employer? What if they work for the oil industry? You know, you can't just, you have to say to them, what are the most important issues to you? And listen to them, make them feel that you're listening and you're going to try to represent them with their representative. And then you have a reciprocal relationship. So say I'm lobbying my representative, Richard Bloom, because I don't want him to vote on this charter school bill or whatever. And it doesn't look like he's with me. Then I mobilize all the people in the community to bombard his office with calls, right? So I got this system here, and I'm really hoping that with this California Progressive Alliance, we could put it into action and see if it works, because I think it could be a model for other states.
Now, I like this. This sounds like the Nader plan, where Ralph Nader kind of made this argument that if you had enough representatives, you can compel your congressman to come for a meeting, and you should essentially bug the hell out of the congressman and get across that you are ever vigilant in regards to what they're doing in office. I've often made this argument, you have dollars or pitchforks, and there are no pitchforks. There are no pitchforks. Like, if they don't do that, then what? See, because I always hit my head on this thing of, even if you protest, so what? I mean, at the end of the day, if that person can listen to that protest, are you going to let a Republican take office? Like, what does accountability mean to you in this context?
No, we have the top two primaries, so 2 Democrats can get in to the top. It's
Oh,
not,
I see. California. Yeah. That's right. California. You guys have a different model.
Yeah, and the Republican Party is dead. They just lost all of their seats. 7 congressional seats they lost. It. You know, the canvass, the counting of the votes. The counting of the votes takes a month here because so many of our people vote by absentee and provisional ballot. So it looked like these Republicans won on election night, but there were still a couple million votes to be counted, and it takes a month. So by the end of the month, every single one of them had lost.
Wow.
So that is the electorate holding people accountable. There were 62% of the people voted, which was the highest votes in the midterms since 1982 here in California, and they ousted, you know, these. And it was the Trump effect. It was totally the Trump effect. Now, the sad thing is that the Democrats who won were not necessarily the most progressive.
This
because
is kind of my point. Yeah.
No, but this is our fault because during the primary process, the Democrats were disorganized, and every Bernie Crat and his uncle was running for office, you know, because they were all revved up. And so they were like fighting each other, and some of them, you know, started to drop out, like in that Harley Ruda contest or whatever, the one that he won. He's a former Republican, by the way, and a millionaire. So, you know, and then Katie Hill, who a lot of Bernie Crat progressives were supporting, who took out Steve Knight. And I'm very happy that Steve Knight lost, by the way. He was horrific. But you just say it's anybody but Steve Knight. Don't try to put lipstick on a pig and call her progressive. Seriously. Because she never said she supported Medicare for all. And when she joined the Congress, and now this is schizophrenic, so we got to see which way she goes. But she is bisexual. She is a self-identified bisexual. So this makes sense. She joined both the New Democrat caucus and the Progressive caucus.
How does she do both? How do you do both? So,
I know,
should Medicare
right?
for all be a red line?
Well, I think so.
I think so too.
Don't you agree?
Yes, I absolutely agree. If Beto doesn't support Medicare for all and he's running against Ted Cruz, do you still support Beto?
Yeah.
This is a hypothetical. So Medicare for all is not a red line.
Well, but first of all, he wasn't running against Medicare for all. I think he started out talking about it, and then he stopped talking about it. I
guess I'm
there's
asking this more.
There's sellouts and there's sellouts. Okay.
Right.
I mean,
well,
look,
you know, he backed away from that. There was a conversation, I think it was on The Intercept, where the person he was running against, she asked him, you know, she was like, look, I just need assurances that you're going to do X, Y, Z. And he's looking at her like, yeah, you're not getting those assurances. All right. So one more.
Well, let's talk about, before you leave Beto, let's talk about him
because he seems
I just sent an email. I want to see, hold on a second. I want to see if Alex got back to me. Alex Koch just wrote this amazing article. Oh, wait a minute. I went the other way. I got to see something here. Alex Koch. Okay, I guess I can't get off of you and onto my Chrome. Wait a minute. Hold on. Yes, I can. He hasn't gotten back to me yet. Okay, now I got to figure out how to get back to you. Oh, here you are. Wrote this article in Sludge about the David Sirota tweet. Did you happen to see that?
Yes.
Okay.
they flipped out. David Sirota just put a tweet that said, hey, it's interesting that Beto is the second highest oil guy in Congress. And they flipped out. They went ballistic. They're like, how dare you, sir?
Well, Neera Tanden
attacking Beto.
Yeah, that's what Neera Tanden said.
Yeah,
she said
she is out of touch.
She tries to associate everything with Bernie. And then the third article came out by Elizabeth Bruning in the Washington Post about how Beto's no progressive. There was an article in Jacobin. Beto is no progressive. Zaid Jilani wrote one in Current Statesman. He's no progressive. I mean, they're showing how he voted for TPP fast track, how he voted to weaken Dodd-Frank, how, all these other votes of his, he's no progressive.
I think he's the white Obama. Personally, I said that earlier, then that's why I seen other people saying it. Now, the reason I said is because magnificent in fundraising. He was able to raise like $30 million. And
68, wasn't it
this
68
progressive sound, without necessarily the substance behind the sound. And people like Neera Tanden was like, oh my God, he's awesome. Loves him, which, should give you pause in and of itself. She is massively out of touch. I didn't realize how out of touch she was. She sent out a tweet and she was like, I don't understand why the progressives are supporting the yellow vests. And I'm like, you don't understand. They raised, Macron cut taxes on the top 1% in France. Massive, massive tax cut. And on top of cutting taxes, he put on a gas tax that would have made gas equivalent to like $7 a gallon. That is mind blowing. Now, if you're driving a cab, if you're doing anything like an Uber or any of those things, or for that matter, if you're just a mom and pop, many of the people in France are living at the bottom edges anyway. And this, if you had to pay $7 a gallon for gas, that is brutal. That is utterly brutal after giving a tax cut. And it's like somebody had to explain to her, you don't understand why people who are living at the bottom of the economic ladder are getting a tax of $7 a gallon while they're raising, lowering taxes on the top 1%. She's oblivious. And it's like, this was a person, this is the wing of the party that's trying to take power. That's terrifying.
Are you talking about the tweet where she said, I don't understand why French protesters are protesting a carbon tax? That one?
She said she doesn't understand why progressives are supporting the protesting of a carbon tax. Yes.
Okay, because that one, yeah, first of all, it's not a carbon tax in the sense that we talk about a carbon tax. And I want to talk about why a carbon tax is bad in our sense. Yeah. But this was actually not a carbon tax. So she totally misunderstood that. It was a actual tax on gas that low-income people would be paying.
Right. But Macron was going to essentially try to solve climate change on the backs of the poor and the economy.
But even if it was a carbon tax, what would happen, which would mean you would tax the producers, the oil and gas producers. And this is something that certain big green groups and environmental groups want to have in this country to try to de-incentivize fossil fuel production. But as we know, they're just going to pass the taxes on to the consumers anyway. Right. And a carbon tax, like cap and trade, is a market-based mechanism, which is a neoliberal solution to a problem. What we need to do is regulate it and keep the oil in the ground, not figure out some way to do it through the marketplace. Because what they do with cap and trade is, and this is why the Indigenous Environmental Network is against it, and they had a report that they released at the COPA talks. And I just had to tell another progressive, the former administrator of the Sandinistas Facebook group, why this cap and trade is bad. Because what happens is they can continue to pollute at the refineries. In California, they have them in Richmond and Torrance and Wilmington, which is terrible for the air of the people, especially the children who live around there. As long as they buy like a rainforest in South America.
Right.
So what they do with this rainforest is they buy the rainforest and preserve it, which I guess in and of itself is a good thing, because what we see happening now with Brazil, the president of Brazil wants to cut down all the rainforest, which basically captures all the carbon. So it's going to put, climate change on steroids. But what the indigenous people are complaining about is when they buy this rainforest, they eject all the indigenous people who are living sustainably off the land, hunting and gathering, fishing, whatever they're doing, and they eject them off their land because they now own it, and they push them out into the market economy where they're ill-equipped because they don't have the education or the skills to get any kind of high-paying job. So they're taking all these low-paying jobs, or they don't get jobs at all. And the rate of alcoholism amongst these these indigenous people and all these other social problems are on the rise because of what's happened. So these are sort of the opportunity costs, if you will, of cap and trade that nobody thinks about. So, yeah, I mean, and then what I've heard in California is, oh, we're the only state that doesn't have an oil extraction tax. Look, Texas has one, Alaska has one. Well, guess what? The people are now dependent on the oil extraction tax, and that just incentivizes more oil extracting, because the
Yeah.
more they extract, the more tax money. And in California, there was a proposal to have it fund the schools. Well, no, you don't have the school. You don't hijack school funding to oil production, which increases climate change and adverse effects to people's health who live near, oil wells.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate incentive. I mean, ultimately, you're taking a tax for something that's pretty horrendous. And if you stop the thing that's pretty horrendous, what are you going to do for the funding, for that particular tax fund? That's a horrible incentive.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. Even if it was a carbon tax, like you said, that's still hitting the bottom rung. That's not necessarily the way you want to pay for that. I've made this argument before that the Green New Deal is a good thing. I've argued that the politics of it matter, that you have to deal with the situations of people themselves first. You can't balance climate change on the backs of the people, and they're not going to agree with your climate change thing. Nobody's going to care about climate change if they're having difficult straits, if their gas is going up, twofold. West Virginia is a good example. So 25% of the people in West Virginia, 25% of the kids are poverty. Like, this is a magnificent amount of, and yet they vote Republican. And people miss why they vote Republican, because Democrats are always talking about attacking their livelihood without necessarily giving them a pathway in order to, find something else for them to do to compensate for the livelihood. Love Sanders, but they never necessarily took that thing of, well, wait a minute, why are they loving, why do they hate every other Democrat? When Obama was running, wasn't there a guy in jail that got higher votes than Obama? Like, it was some insane thing. Now, they said, oh, they're all racist, missing the point of, well, maybe it's maybe some of them, but maybe it's also the policy that these guys are doing. When what they hear in their head is, yeah, this climate change stuff is one thing, but you guys are attacking my livelihood. And if you're attacking my livelihood, I need to feed my kids, I need to keep a house, I need to do all these things. I'm not going to care about this climate change stuff if my livelihood is being adversely affected. I suspect that's why Joe Manchin keeps his job, because Joe Manchin just keeps saying, I'm an old man and that's all I'm ever going to do. And I hate,
You mean coal?
The taxes for the stuff.
You mean coal?
Yeah, coal. I'm sorry. Yeah, coal. He's a coal man, right?
Yeah, well, here's the problem. Workers can make a lot of money in these jobs. And I protested the Blue-Green Alliance. I organized a protest remotely, actually, but with some people up in San Francisco, because Jerry Brown was about to be awarded. This was back in, I think, 2013 or something. He was going to be awarded the Right Stuff Award from the Blue-Green Alliance. And the Blue-Green Alliance is this BS group that's done jack shit, but it's supposed to be allying labor with environmentalists, okay? So to give the guy who refuses to ban fracking, who's trying to get rid of the most sacred environmental law we have, CEQA. He's been trying to get rid of CEQA for years because it holds up development projects, because everything needs to have an environmental impact review. And who's been trying to put these two twin tunnel projects, the Delta tunnels, which will decimate the salmon industry and the indigenous people's way of life in the Sacramento Delta, and not even get any new water to Southern California, even though the ratepayers of Southern California would be paying for it. It's just a water grab for big oil and big ag in the Central Valley. They don't even want to pay for it. Their water district said, we're not paying for this. So why did our water district, the Metropolitan Water District, say we're going to pay for the whole thing? This is BS. Somebody's getting paid off here. And I'm waiting for the new LA Times, under the billionaire who's been doing such great work, investigative work. This guy's funding so many, article after article, blowing the whistle on this, blowing the whistle on that. I'm waiting for him to investigate who's getting the payoffs there at MW, at the Metropolitan Water District, because there's something's funny going on here. But so he was going to get this Right Stuff Award. And we organized this protest where I said, okay, let's change the program. that we hand people when they go in. And when they open up the program, they see all the reasons why Jerry Brown should actually get the wrong stuff award. And you have frozen, Jamarl. I see you in a frozen position.
You say I'm frozen?
Oh my God, you were just holding that position. That was just you, like being completely still. Oh my God, I thought it was like the video froze or something. You didn't even move an eyelash.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I was staring. I was looking to make sure, see if anybody had sent anything or questioned. And I'm just kind of staring at the screen.
So what happened was, in that same year, in 2013, some, good councilman in Carson, California, wanted to have a moratorium on fracking because Occidental Petroleum had just announced they wanted to build 200 new wells in Carson, which is a poor community, working class, people of color community that is already inundated with all these toxic projects. So this guy, Albert Robles, wanted to have a fracking moratorium. And Maria Elena Durazo, who just won, she ran unopposed practically to the Assembly, California Assembly. She took Jimmy Gomez's seat because he took Becerra's seat in Congress. She bussed in 500 workers, mostly Teamsters and IBEW, the Electrical Workers Union, to testify against the fracking moratorium. Now, this is a woman who cut her teeth with Cesar Chavez, okay, with the grape workers, right? Because they were being exposed to all sorts of toxic conditions. And there she is, sitting next to George Milstein, who is the $1,000 an hour lawyer from Latham and Watkins, who represented Occidental, right? She and he are sitting next to each other, and I actually snapped a photo of it when I was there, and I have proof. Thick as thieves, trying to take down this fracking ban. Wow. And they were saying jobs for Carson when there was only going to be 34 jobs. They weren't going to go to residents of Carson because they'd bring in people from Texas or North Dakota, and they weren't even unionized jobs. So this is ridiculous. And why do they do this? Because the LA County Fed is like the local arm of the AFL-CIO, which is 54 different unions. And one of the strongest unions in there is the Building Trades Union. And the Building Trades Union, they fight for these jobs on these pipelines, in these refineries, because they can make $120,000 a year working in a refinery.
I see.
And I will tell you that solar installers making minimum wage, this whole idea of the just transition, I've been skeptical of that since day one, because none of these solar firms or wind farms or whatever are paying the kind of wages that they're paying in the oil industry.
Yeah.
So in order to have a just transition, they're going to have to do something about wages in this country, because there's a downward push on wages. Getting stuff up to $15 an hour is good, but it's not nearly what it should be. It should be like $22 an hour. And people are making the same thing they made in the 80s, pretty much. So we can't address a just transition unless we also look at the issue of wages. And also maybe we need to look at a universal basic income.
Yes, agree. Like I said, I think you have to deal with, look, if a person is vulnerable, they're not going to care about climate. It's just not. It's not going to be one of those things that's on their mind. If I have to feed my kid, I have to pay for my house, I have to pay for my car, I have to, for the things that you need to live a life. All right. So is there any? We've ran the gambit of questions. Like we're all over the place. Is there anything that you want to say before we conclude?
Well, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what you've been observing on your European trip, because, you talked a little bit about the yellow vests, and they, Bloomberg had an article about how that's really a threat to the whole order of things. Angela Merkel's on her way out. There's pressure in Germany. We know that Hungary has been taken over by a government, a neo-Nazi government. There's sympathizers. The Ukrainian head that we put in, with the coup that we supported, We blame it on Russia, but it was really us,
It was us.
is supported by neo-Nazis. And the only bright light maybe seems to be, Jeremy Corbyn there in England. So can you describe some of the things that you've been observing?
Yes. Observing. So I haven't been to France yet. I mean, at least not on this particular leg of the trip. I've been following it, but I haven't necessarily been. I would argue that that is a bright spot, believe it or not. I know it looks bad, and I know it looks chaotic. People turning over cars and setting things on fire. It doesn't necessarily look great. But that is a grassroots movement of regular people, mom, pops, kids, all across the political spectrum that have come together to say, no, you want to talk about activism, that's activism. And they're not doing it, out of some kind of hateful, spiteful thing. They're doing it purely as a response for a government that is alienated from the population itself. They are saying, we're done. This is not even the trade unions. This is regular people who took these yellow smocks that they were forced to use and has used it almost to shame the government into capitulation. Macron has gotten to the point where he's come out today and has given a speech saying, okay, I'm going to increase wages. I'm going to cut taxes. They put a tax on pensions, not to mention that gas tax. He's come out giving all sorts of concessions based on those protests. I would say that is a damn bright spot. And again, I know it doesn't look that way. It looks like, oh my God, they're setting stuff on fire. But that is a government that was not paying attention to what the population wanted. And they asserted themselves. And when they tried to put a pause on it, they said, we don't want your crumbs. And they continue to protest that much more, even being almost infuriated by the idea that he's going to kind of try to do this kind of shuck and jive thing. Okay, we'll pause it for 6 months and then we'll reintroduce it later. They were like, nonsense. We're not taking any of that. It's amorphous. It's all across the political spectrum. So you have some people saying, we want Frexit. We want France to leave the European Union. Other people say they want Macron's head. Other people, the only thing that they fully agree on is we don't like the gas tax. Our wages are too low, and we do not like this order of things. The question becomes, how is Macron going to pay for this? France is already in massive amounts of debt. And in being massive amounts of debt, you can imagine that Germany doesn't necessarily like the fact that France is massive amounts of debt. And they're going to have to come up with a funding mechanism in order to pay for it, because he doesn't want to raise taxes on the top 1% that he had already given the massive tax cut to. He said that is off the table. The question becomes, what happens to the protests? Do the protesters look at this and say, okay, or do the protests say, no, we want your head, and continue to protest? They have 70% approval? Like, that's amazing. Like 80% of the population say, we don't like the fact that you're setting stuff on fire, but 70 to 80% say, but we agree with what you're doing. Like, that's an amazing number. Like, I can't fathom getting 80% approval on anything in this country. And I don't even think Social Security has 80% approval. Like, that's a magnificent number of people who've said, we don't like this, including the cops. Like, there are situations where the cops have taken their helmets off saying, look, we are in solidarity too, because we have to pay this gas tax just like everybody else. And we don't like the way this is going either.
Let me ask you about that. Let me ask you, because I was going to ask you if you didn't mention it. That was very critical to me, because I remember during Occupy, I was very involved with Occupy LA. I didn't camp out there, but I would go down there very frequently. And what I would notice was there was a certain percentage, I think it was like a lot of the anonymous people with the Guy Fawkes masks, would play this fishing game with the police. They would take a stick and a string, and they would put a donut on the end of the string, and they would taunt the cops with the donut, because cops are supposed to always be eating donuts or something. And I used to say to them, don't do that. The cops are the part of the 99%. We got to get the cops on our side, because the only time when revolutions have ever succeeded in the world is when the police and the army are on the side of the protesters.
Yeah.
So when I read this about the police taking their helmets off and refusing to attack the protesters, I thought, this is great, because you say it looks bad, but to someone like me, who is an adherent of Chris Hedges, who says the only thing that will bring change right now is mass nonviolent civil disobedience. Yeah. I agree with that. I think all this stuff within the Democratic Party, I mean, it's interesting to talk about and to report on, but in my mind, that's not what's going to create change. And I would even go further. I would talk about a general strike when people don't go to work, when people don't buy anything that they don't need. And also putting our bodies in front of the machine, like stopping them from building these pipelines, or like the valve turners did when they amassed along the border of the US-Canadian border. 5 of them turned off the valves simultaneously to prevent tar sands oil from flowing into this country. And these were seniors, citizens, baby boomers and senior citizens who had tried everything and nothing worked. And they were literally willing to spend the rest of their lives in jail to do this action. So I'm in total,
That's why I say I think that's a bright spot. Like, that's why I kind of make that point. I've done maybe 3 or 4 shows on the Yellow Vests. There's a certain amount of solidarity, and I use the term pride, but I'm not French, so pride is probably the wrong word for it. But there is something about that revs something up in me. While like, yes, it's
wait, hold on a second. Keep talking. I'll be right back.
Okay. Yeah, utterly and completely defiant, in a way that's epic and badass, and not just epic. I mean, they've been able to actually pull concessions from the government in a way that is real and tangible. The question becomes, does he follow through with them? And not just does he follow through with them, do they stop? It's an amorphous thing. I mean, there's not, as far as I know, there's not necessarily a clear leader on this stuff. And even when they're interviewing people, oftentimes they're interviewing like random people who aren't necessarily, I am the figurehead of this particular organization. It seems to be somewhat decentralized, and what they want seems to be somewhat diffuse. But that is an amazing, I think what Macron realized was his approval rating is like 20%, and their approval rating is like 80%. And these guys are not stopping. It is getting worse. Like you said, there are situations where the cops are extremely sympathetic to him. I think they were concerned that this was going to continue to something nasty. Now, we were okay with this taking place in Ukraine. If you remember, when this was taking place in Ukraine, the United States and Western powers egged us on. It was like, yes, keep going. This is great. When Putin did the counter revolution, they're like, oh, that's bad. We don't like that. And now this is taking place in France. They're like, whoa, we don't like this. Well, wait a minute. You thought it was awesome when it was taking place in the Ukraine, but now you don't particularly like this. I think that's a bright spot. Jeremy Corbyn.
Let me ask you, Jeremy Corbyn and the Brexit, what's going on with that?
All right, so Theresa May has had several humiliating defeats. One, she tried to be a little too slick. When she took power after Cameron collapsed, his government collapsed because he staked his reputation on Brexit, and they voted to leave. He didn't think the public was going to leave. Theresa May had a snap election. Now, she had the snap election because she thought she could break the back of Jeremy Corbyn and get her say-so in regards to, she can run the table. She has all the Tory MPs. She can do whatever she wants. That didn't work. Corbyn picked up massive number of seats. She lost her majority, and she needed the DUP, which is a Northern Irish Iron Party, to back up in proper government. In needing this DUP to prop up her government, Jeremy Corbyn at this point was looking awesome, confidence exuding from him after prime minister questions. You would have thought he won it. She had a problem. The Northern Ireland border became an issue. Northern Ireland, and so the Republic of Ireland is a country unto itself. It's a sovereign nation. But Britain has decided it wants to leave the European Union, but Ireland isn't going anywhere, the Republic of Ireland. So that would necessitate a border between those two things, which is forbidden through the Good Friday Agreement. Britain and Ireland had several conflicts. The Good Friday Agreement essentially settled those conflicts, but part of the rule is no border. There can't be a border. But if they separate, there will be a border there, which means Theresa May has a problem. How do you square that issue? And she has not been able to find a way to square that issue. So she implements or allows a backstop. The problem with the backstop is Britain loses sovereignty. So Britain has this weird situation where it would not be able to extricate itself from a deal if they can't figure out a deal that deals with the Northern Ireland issue. Her team, Brexiteers, balked at this. Remainers balked at this. And she was going to suffer one of the most humiliating defeats in the history of the prime minister in the history of parliament. Not to mention, on top of that, she tried to create a pressure tactic where she wanted people to be like, this is Brexit or nothing, meaning either you take my deal or nothing else. Parliament asserted itself and voted down several of her motions. So one of them was, no, we're going to get a meaningful vote. Not just a meaningful vote. If Brexit fails, meaning if we vote you down, we're also going to get an option on what we want to do after this. And held the government in contempt for not passing or not giving the legal advice. The government didn't want to give the legal advice. It was like 1,000 pages and the government gave like 40. So this was like breathtaking things that were taking place in Britain. This was unprecedented. This has never happened before. Today or yesterday, they were supposed to have the vote today. They were supposed to come out and they were supposed to vote on the withdrawal bill. Yesterday, the prime minister, in complete humiliation, pulled the withdrawal vote. Meaning she, after all of this debate, after all of these 2 years, she realized she was going to suffer the most humiliating defeat in the history of parliament. And she says, I am now pulling the withdrawal vote. So we're not going to have that vote, and this vote is postponed. And I am going to go and talk to the European leaders to see if I can get a better deal. Juncker comes out and says, there is no better deal. This is all you're going to get. The prime minister is about to collapse, meaning she's going to lose her prime ministership. They've warned her, if you can't extricate a better deal, you are going to lose your prime ministership. Your government is going to collapse. Theresa May is a zombie prime minister at this point. And she's not going to get anything else from the European Union. So it is unclear what is going to take place at this point. She has been roundly, this is complete humiliation from the standpoint of Britain. And the EU
any opportunity that Jeremy Corbyn could lead a new government?
So yes. So if her government collapses, the question becomes, how do they square that circle? Meaning, do they go back for another referendum? Do they have another election? It's like, what happens? They've been calling for a vote of no confidence. Whether or not they get the number of votes necessary in order to call for that vote of no confidence is unknown. They have warned Theresa May that if you cannot get a better deal, the government is going to collapse. The DUP has already told her. That's the other thing. Theresa May's government is being propped up by the DUP. The DUP is fanatic about remaining part of the UK. They are not going to allow her to have that backstop. And they've told her this is a fail, this is a no. And Theresa May's government would collapse if the DUP pulls her support. This is not a good place for her to be in. And people are expecting that government to implode at any moment. Brexit is fascinating because nobody knows what's going to happen. This is a wild card at this point. This is not like a typical procedure where, item by item by item. This is, everything is falling apart. Everything is up in the air in regards to what takes place. If they have a snap election, Jeremy Corbyn is going to win the prime ministership. That's the first point. The second point is Jeremy Corbyn has said he's putting all options on the table if he takes control. The problem with that is there could be a backlash, a significant chance that there's a backlash if he puts a second referendum on the table from people who wants him to go through with the Brexit, meaning he's concerned that he could lose the election if one comes up, if he agrees to go for a second referendum. It's politics at a level that's international and internal because, you have people who are Remainers and Brexiteers, both in Labour and in the Tory party. And both of these sides are kind of fighting. When they did that Brexit vote, it was like 53-47. Like it was very, very close. And those divisions are breaking apart the Tory government, but it's also breaking apart Labour.
Okay, well, I want to get off of that. And I want to ask you, first of all, tell me which countries you've been to, so I know which countries to ask you about.
All right, so I've been, let's see, we started off in Kenya. From Kenya, we went to, I think, Qatar, Dubai, Cairo, Sharm el Sheikh. That's Egypt. We ended up in what else? What else? What else? Um, oh, geez, I'm running a blank. Oh, Lisbon, um, Portugal, Spain. From Spain, we jumped to, let me see, I'm in Poland now. We were in Czech Republic earlier. Amsterdam.
Wow. What is your biggest impression of, like, I guess you could take do the Middle East, do Africa, do Europe. What are some of your big takeaways from this trip?
So one of the surprises is Kenya. I was slightly racist, and didn't necessarily put Africa on my original tour list, and I ended up Kenya has been one of my favorite places. People speak English because of the Brits' history in there. That I didn't know. Britain was brutal and vicious from the standpoint of the codes and laws that they put into place, but it left a stamp. Like, even 50 years later, there's still this kind of there's a Britishness about Kenya, either in the language, the tea, that type of stuff. It's a fascinating country. There's aspects of it that profoundly impoverished, like these shanty towns, that's almost these lawless little areas. But around the shanty towns, it's just a big city that anyone will be familiar with from going. Let me see. I'm trying to think of Qatar. So Dubai. Dubai looks like a space age city. Like Dubai, it's
like the Jetsons, right?
Yeah,
that
it looks
old
like the
cartoon.
Jetsons. It's insane. Like the amount of wealth that's in that country is breathtaking. Like you're talking about like golden toilets, that type of stuff. It's like the Uber driver was driving like a Benz. Like it was so weird. And then it's like all of these skyscrapers, all of these waterways, these guys are building in obscene ways, like just insane amount of building. And the wealth that they're using, they're reinvesting it back into the country itself. Dubai has certain issues from the standpoint of foreign policy, but they are building profound, like it's all over the place. Like everywhere you go, there's something being built in the desert. Lisbon, Portugal is weird.
Well, wait
Portugal's
a minute. You were in Qatar, right?
I was in Qatar. We were only
Okay.
Qatar for like a day though. That was
okay. Because I was going to ask you about what's going on with Salman bin whatever his name is, from Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Now I can tell you a little bit about it. I interviewed the cab driver. In fact, I think I even got a video of that. My wife took a video while I was interviewing the cab driver. So Saudi Arabia was bullying Qatar and bullying them in a way where it was and Trump. Trump was trying to extract money from them or something. It was some weird thing that was going on between Trump and Qatar. And the guy kind of made the point like, look, we're not dependent on any other country. We're perfectly okay. But Saudi Arabia was militarily occupying a particular area of Qatar and was using their military to threaten them. I forget what the specifics was for the threat. I know part of it had to do with the video that Al Jazeera was showing, because Al Jazeera, is a Qatar thing. But it was something else. But there was conflicts. There was military conflicts on the border of Qatar. And the cab driver just seemed so casual about it. I was like, what do you mean? How are you this casual about them threatening you in this way? He looks at it as, this is just an everyday life. This is, it is what it is. And you can't necessarily see it as a big deal because there's nothing you can do about it in the first place. You go on but your way. That's a relationship. They're in somewhat of a difficult neighborhood, and they just have to deal with those realities.
When you were there, were you there during the time when this whole thing with Khashoggi went down?
No, I wasn't. You mean, but that took place in Turkey. That wasn't.
Right, but I mean, I'm just wondering what they were
Their
thinking in
response.
these. What?
So
Yeah, no, because if the news from those Middle East countries about
it
this
was
was
everywhere.
different than what it was here.
It was everywhere. Like it was one of those things where every country that you were in, Khashoggi was on the front cover. Couldn't completely different language, Khashoggi's face. Whether it was Kenya, Qatar, all of them. Every last country, whether it was Spain, Lisbon, the works, it didn't matter. All of them was running that as a front page story, and it was constant. In each of the countries we were in, that was one of the main stories that kept coming up over and over and over. It was like running on a loop. It was
And
a
were
big
there?
deal.
I know that these stories or straight reporting are a little different from the editorials, but editorially, did you find that they were quick to blame Saudi Arabian government? And what are his initials again?
So
Salman SMB. What is it?
Bin Salman, Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah,
So in Europe, yeah,
MBS,
Europe
MBS.
assumed that it was his fault. Europe didn't. There was no, it was like he did it. There was no, there was like investigation with in quotes.
And
Because
were they shocked at our, our government's machinations, or specifically Trump's machinations, to try to pin it on someone else, like a rogue operation or whatever?
it didn't seem like they were shocked, but it was the European Union was doing its own thing with this. Like the European Union was having, they were having, they were trying to pass sanctions. Essentially, they were trying to cut the association without bin Salman. They were taking this as an opportunity to reshift the relationship between them and bin Salman. The problem with that is many of those countries have oil relationships with
Yes.
Saudi Arabia, and regardless of what they want to say, that relationship is maintained. Like Theresa May. Now, Angela Merkel was the first one, if I'm not mistaken, to come out saying she's cutting ties from the standpoint of their oil relationship. The European Union was a lot of bluster. Many of them were pissed off. Many of them were looking for blame and looking for some kind of something to do. But there was limits. Like some were whole hog. We don't want to have any ties with Saudi Arabia. We need to cut these ties. Others were like, well, we need to moderate this, we need to, give a strongly worded rebuke, but let's back off on talking about cutting the oil relationship. It's fascinating. The United States response to this was initially Saudi Arabia. That's a bizarre country. I mean, the idea that a person walks into an embassy, into your embassy, and vanishes, abducted by aliens, just gone, and their response is, "We don't know what happened to him." What do you mean you don't know what happened to him? It was in your embassy. And then to believe that the rest of the world looks at this and just is going to take their story as being legit, it was nonsense. Like it was complete nonsense. Turkey comes out immediately, says they killed the guy. Like Erdogan is flipping out. Erdogan was leaking information to the media because Erdogan wanted the United States to take the lead in dealing with it.
Yeah,
Erdogan,
did you see the stuff that came of the audio tape that just came out where you can hear him being sawed?
Well, they didn't allow us to do it. So they were leaking those to like Trudeau and many of the world leaders. Apparently, they leaked the information to the media in Turkey. I don't necessarily know if they played it online, but apparently you could hear him being chopped up.
Yeah.
And part of the tape, one of the guys, the doorman, was kind of flipping out, and the guy told the doorman, unless you want to be next, you need to shut up and go into the other room. Somebody else turned the radio up in order to kind of kill the screams as they were chopping him to bits. Like this stuff was grim. I mean, this is just had on the audio tape.
Well, the only good thing, if anything could be said good about this horrific tragedy, is that it lit a fire under the U.S. Senate for Bernie Sanders' bill with Mike Lee, which has been languishing for over a year now, to cut funding to that war. And it just passed the Senate, by the 2/3 majority that it needs. So now I guess Ro Khanna, and I don't remember who his co-sponsors are, have a similar bill in the Congress. But, if that goes through, that's going to be pretty significant. But You mentioned the oil. I read just the other day that for the first time, the U.S. has become a net exporter of oil. And Obama was actually talking to, I don't remember who he was talking to, but he was basically saying, and you can thank me for this.
Yeah, he was
so
bragging.
essentially, basically the fact that Obama quadrupled fracking in this country and all the other things that he did, he was actually the one who wanted to end the 30-year ban on drilling in the Atlantic. He was the one that actually did start drilling in the Arctic, although not the refuge. He was the one that wanted to start, drilling in the Gulf after the BP oil spill. He was the one that pushed the TPP that would expedite permits for LNG terminals, which is what they use to export liquefied natural gas. So he was absolutely the worst. Of course, the pink pussy hats, resistance people, they don't know this. They think he's great. So I think, it always has to do with the oil. And I think they're able to make a lot of these political decisions, like Angela Merkel. I mean, who knows if that's because she knows she's going to get the rest of the oil, whatever she doesn't get from Saudi Arabia, she's now going to get it from the US, right? And, you always need these things like shock doctrine. Okay, so this is sort of a shock doctrine in reverse. Usually it works against progressives. Like you have Hurricane Katrina, and they use that to close every single public school in New Orleans and make them all charters. Or, some of these other shock doctrine effects. But so this was, I think, a good effect of some horrible tragedy. If it passes the House, if Trump signs it, if they have a veto-proof majority. But what do people think of Trump over there? And what do they think of Americans electing him?
So it depends on where you are. So in Israel, the people I talked to in Israel liked him. Like,
of course.
but this was purely related to Israel, if that makes sense. Like this wasn't, I remember one of the guys I was talking to, he was like, he said something about Trump, and he says, yeah, but I don't understand why his policies are that bad. But he liked him. But he likes them only in relation to Israel. It's like the only issue that he has to deal with is Israel. But when you start getting the policies, like, I don't understand why he thinks that way about climate change and the other type of stuff. Other countries can't stand him. Cannot stand him. It like when you get into like Spain and Portugal and all these other countries, can't stand him. In Poland, it was a little weird. So one of the guys that I talked to, he was a doctor actually. Him and I had a really good conversation because he was I think he was the only person there that spoke English. So I was shocked as all hell that he was talking to me in English, and it took me a while to register. Wait a minute, he's speaking English. But he said something about Trump, but he said it in this kind of positive way. And he says, well, he's done some things good. I said, well, what do you think he's done good? He says, well, he's trying to balance the relationship with China. And I said, yeah, but I mean, he's also trying to start a war with Iran, which led into a conversation about Russia, and in which case Poland hates Russia. Now, Poles hate Russia because Russia occupied that territory during, after the war. And so their idea of foreign policy to some degree revolves around that. Like it's utterly fascinating. Like Europeans some of them regard this differently than we do. They look at this stuff from the standpoint of the Cold War. So like NATO, like they would say, because he was like, I said, you realize that if they tried to invade you, that you're a NATO nation, all of these other countries kick in. He says, well, maybe. I said, what do you mean maybe? He says, yeah, we don't know that for certain. And I was like, but why do you, I said, and this is shocking to me because I'm from the United States, where uberly militaristic, and I couldn't conceive of NATO not activating. Maybe not for Estonia, but for Poland, yeah. His point was, we've gotten assurances in the past, and those assurances, he said when Russia decided to invade last time, Britain and France kind of made all this noise about it, but didn't necessarily do anything about it. And we were occupied and it took our territory. So why would we just automatically believe that NATO is going to kick in now. Like, this is fascinating because he's talking about 50 years of a historical context of that particular country. Whereas from my own historical context, I couldn't conceive of what he was saying to be true. Like, there's nothing in me that would believe that the United States wouldn't activate, whether it's a Democratic president, Republican president, whether it's Bernie Sanders. Like, all of these guys would kick in the gear. But from his standpoint, he has a historical precedent where he was taken by Poland and by Russia and Germany. And in his mind, we don't know that. So he becomes more hawkish from the standpoint of foreign policy because in his mind, we need to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
Like, utterly fascinating. And this is purely like, from my standpoint, the argument that him and I were having had more to do with, we're spending $700 billion a year on the military. There are no barbarians at our gates, and we can't be policemen of the world. We can't afford it. We don't even have clean water in Flint. This is our responsibility at this point needs to change. And then, getting into this thing with the Ukraine, and it's like, well, yeah, but we also provoked that particular revolution in that country. So yeah, that's fair, but Russia is not an honest actor. I say, yeah, but we're not an honest actor either. Like, it's an interesting conversation from the standpoint of a country that's been invaded versus a country that has been absolutely militaristic over the past 50 years.
Now, do you see, I know you just got there, but do you see the evidence of any neo-Nazi resurgence like there is in Hungary? I mean, they have an outright neo-Nazi as their leader.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. So I'm going touring in the next few days. And the language barrier becomes an issue. So in Warsaw, you have more people who speak English. In Glebsi, there was like little to nobody that spoke English. You're essentially a ghost. And Czech Republic has all these small towns. And so because of so many small towns like Ostrava and Karnov, again, you get in a situation where the majority of the people don't speak the language. So communicating becomes somewhat difficult. Warsaw seems to be a little bit better. And so I'll get the opportunity to go turn over the weekend. So
you should interview with your phone, take your iPhone and record these interviews, not live stream them necessarily, but record them. And then when you come back, you can edit them. Be interesting.
I am when I get the opportunity, but that's assuming that the person allows me to do it. Now, my wife was doing it on the sly. Like, she was kind of like, she was holding it up as I was talking to the person, and I get the interview that way. The doctor, that was just shocking and out the blue because I didn't even realize he was speaking to me in English it took a moment. And that conversation just kind of ended there. I didn't necessarily know it was going to go there. Interesting. That was probably one of my most interesting conversations there. There was another conversation I had with a guy from Denmark. We met in a casino in Kenya. And he talked to me for like 4 hours. I could not extricate myself from that conversation. And we were talking about George Bush and Iraq. And I made this argument. I said, well, we killed 1 million people in Iraq. He says, well, I mean, technically you didn't kill 1 million people. I said, well, it was a result of, our actions caused that many deaths. He was like, yeah, but you can't be Pollyannish about this stuff. I was like, I'm not being Pollyannish about this stuff. He invaded a country and, and going back and forth. And again, from his perspective, he's looking at this from the standpoint of, well, the Red Army would have swept over and taken Denmark if it wasn't for this militaristic intervention, et cetera, et cetera.
What, in the Gulf War?
No. He's talking about the United States' role in the world of being this kind of hired gun. Yeah. And this almost defense of this role of being a hired gun, even though he doesn't necessarily back what's taking place in Iraq and many of these other countries.
Well, I don't know if you saw Cenk the other day giving his little tribute to George W. Bush. And starting it off by basically saying that everybody knows that Cenk used to be a Republican.
Yeah.
But he advanced this thing. And after I watched this, I went and read the entire Wikipedia entry on the Gulf War because I was around then, an adult. I was 30-something.
Yeah.
And I was running a public access station here in Beverly Hills. And my ex-husband actually was an attorney. I was producing a show for him called Ask the Lawyer. And it was about legal stuff.
Yeah.
But when we started, when we invaded Iraq, he said, I want to do a show with a peace activist. And my ex-husband wasn't that political, so it kind of surprised me. But I'm like, okay, let's do it, So I found this guy, Blaise Bonpane, who's still around. And I wish I could, I hope this 3/4-inch U-matic tape has not completely dissolved, because I'd love to transfer all these shows onto, DVD or something. But it was, I protest every war, just reflexively, because I'm a pacifist, I'm against war, but I wasn't really following the details so much. And the way Cenk was describing it and the way the Wikipedia entry described it, that it was this doctrine that we had where you don't invade a country that didn't attack you first.
Yes.
So that's what we were protecting, even though I think, and most people think, that we were really protecting the oil. But there was a coalition of 30 countries. It was a very huge coalition. Everybody was in on it with us. So if we're going to talk about him being a war criminal, we've got to have the heads of all those countries be war criminals too, to be intellectually consistent. And it was very much unlike the coalition of the willing, or whatever whatever we called what his son did, that very weak coalition to invade Iraq the second time. But so he was kind of just basically saying that if you look in the context of the theory, the foreign policy of the time, it could be somewhat defensible. But of course, he didn't talk about any of the people dead. He didn't talk about any of the sanctions that we had. We had, whoa, okay, so that light just went out. Yeah, he didn't talk about any of the sanctions that we had. That killed 500,000 Iraqi children, according to the Lancet. He didn't talk about any of that. And he just sounded very much sort of like this geopolitical kind of neocon, to be honest with you. And then, I guess George Bush did do some good things. He raised taxes, which is why he didn't get reelected, after pledging that he wouldn't raise taxes to fund stuff. He, resigned his membership in the NRA in protest. My friend in the disabilities community telling me that he really saved the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mean, there were certain things that I guess he did. And, one would have to say that, yes, he was in the CIA, and yes, the CIA did all these awful things. But, here's how I am. I make explanations for people, not excuses, explanations. So when I say these things, I'm not excusing them. I'm just saying that when you see a guy that grows up the way he did, with a silver spoon in his mouth, very wealthy, went to Yale, went to, he was a World War II hero, if you will, whatever he did, I forget what he did that constituted him being a hero, but he didn't try to get out of the war. But then, of course, most people didn't get out of that war, because that war was considered an honorable war. And he, sort of did what was expected of him. And sometimes you only understand this stuff with the perspective of hindsight, with the perspective of history. Like, I didn't know, well, actually in high school, this was interesting, because in 1974, I think I was a junior in high school taking U.S. history, and I wrote a paper on the revisionist theory of the Cold War, which was basically in counter to the theory that Harry Truman was trying to put over everybody, which was that we were fighting the takeover of the world by communists, right?
Oh, right.
The whole domino theory. That was what Vietnam was all about. This is why we have to save this poor Asian country that never did anything to us, because otherwise, if they take, even though their communist was completely separate from Russia communist, just like North Korea communist is separate from Russia communist, and Cuba communist is separate. I mean, maybe they got some funding, but they were completely independent, organic movements that were trying to basically save their people from the yoke of imperialist colonialism. So this I learned a lot more about when I saw Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States, of course. But the whole world would have been different, of course, if they didn't pull the shenanigans at the DNC. Right, yeah, because that I love that, learning that, because Henry Wallace was the Bernie Sanders of his day, and he was winning until they pulled a fire alarm. They cleared out the convention hall. They strong-armed all the delegates, and the next morning Truman won. And everybody says if Henry Wallace had won and then Roosevelt died, the whole course of history would have been different, So I feel like, it's one thing to say what we say now with the perspective of hindsight and history, but at the time, I don't think he was intending to do evil, And so when Caitlin Johnstone and people like that are celebrating, within hours of his dying, oh, the war, goody, 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 the war criminal is dead. Or in the case of John McCain, where she was praying for his death. I don't know. It doesn't sit well with me. I mean, yes, we have to counter the narrative of everybody, praising him, but that's just what people do when somebody dies. I hope somebody does that when I die, and they don't talk about all the shitty things I've done.
So to be fair, all right. So for the John McCain one, John McCain has advocated for every war in the history of wars that he's been alive for, and not just advocating for him, has openly suggested that the United States bomb one country after the next, even more so than what the Pentagon itself wanted to bomb. That is a depraved indifference to human life, where he didn't necessarily care about the individuals that were going to be at the receiving end of those bombs. I have to be honest, I am beyond this thing of pretending as if the actions of a politician are somehow disassociated from a consequence, meaning that if he's advocating for those things and those things take place, that's going to actually kill and injure a lot of people. And John McCain doesn't care about that, whether that's for political reasons or whether that's just for, his own depraved indifference to human life. It didn't break me up when John McCain died. And Caitlin Johnson, it is rough to hear, I hope his body, drops dead and he goes cold. How she put it? She put it in the most brutal terms that I think I've ever heard anybody describe.
I think if she had a chance, she would have sawed off his legs the way they did with Khashoggi, right? And she would have done it like on Twitter Live or something. That's what I think.
Yeah, she was rough. She wrote like 4 articles on that. She was like, I hope he drops dead and his body, hits the ground and his head, I hope it goes cold. And yeah, she was brutal.
George, but what about Bush? Yeah.
So with Bush, I got to be honest, I didn't know enough about Bush. Now, Jeremy Scahill did an amazing, you could say, I guess, an expose, but the expose was essentially on the worst qualities of Bush. Without necessarily doing any of whatever positive stuff that he might have done. Being head of the CIA, doing that shenanigans of coups and stuff in South America, that is some grimy work. That is some extremely grimy work. Iraq, I feel you, the coalition, ultimately we are going in there to save oil, to prevent, for Saudi Arabia. I don't know. I get your point. If you're calling him a war criminal, you got to call everybody else in those other nations also a war criminal that decided to go into there with him. They did lie in order to kind of prop up that war, though. I mean, George Bush threw that woman out there in order to act like they were pulling babies and killing babies in incubators and whatnot, knowing
that's what they all. Didn't it remind you of the white helmets?
Yes. That's what
when I read that in the Wikipedia thing, I'm like, oh my God, they did the same thing with Syria with the white helmets to justify they did that line in the sand where Assad is gassing his own people. They did the same thing with Iraq. They do that every time because they have to have the propaganda to justify their actions.
Correct. Yes.
So I guess
otherwise the public is not going to go for it.
I guess what I'm doing is I'm separating, because I look at everybody who's born as an innocent baby, right? I don't think, certain people I think are definitely evil. I think Dick Cheney is evil. I think the Koch brothers are evil. I think Ann Coulter is evil because I think seriously, because Ann Coulter, it's an act with her. I think she knows full well that everything she's saying is wrong, and she's just increasing her brand,
Yeah, it sounds like shit to me. It sounds like
there's certain people that I just think are, like I can't find one redeeming quality in them. But I separate him, I guess, as a human. Like, and I'm going to get excoriated for this. People are going to probably tweet about me. I probably shouldn't even say this, but no. Look at him when he died. the last thing that he heard was George W. saying, "I love you, Dad." You know, his kids, he was a good husband to his wife, Barbara, who always looked like George Washington to me. I
Yeah.
saw a picture of Barbara Bush. She looked just like George Washington. But, you know, they had, you know, a good family, and he probably was, you know, but they say Hillary did that too. But I think Hillary did it for political gain. You know, she remembered birthdays, she remembered anniversaries. Hey, they said that about Eric Bauman. Friends of mine, progressive Bernie Sanders supporting friends of mine, supported Eric Bauman because one friend, she works with the homeless, and they were touring Skid Row, and Eric Bauman saw this guy had no shoes, and he went and bought him shoes. This other woman was sick in the hospital, and Eric visited her in the hospital. So sometimes people, you know, their impression of people are colored by their personal relationship with them. And one would, you know, personally, I don't think Hillary has a redeeming bone in her body at all. And I think she did all those things for political gain. I don't know enough about Eric Bauman as a human being. I just know how he treated me, how he treated all. Yeah, no. I'm going to say that Eric Bauman is overall bad, because you don't bully me and bully other women and then, you know, prey on these young gay men in your party. You know, no. He's no good. But I don't know. I don't even know where I'm going with this. I guess it's kind of a stupid
I know what
subject.
you're saying. Your point. You're stuck in a rock and a hard place. Essentially, you're in the lefty sandbox, and the lefty sandbox that you find yourself in has taken a certain position or disposition towards George H.W. Bush. And you, as a person, look at this and say, "Yeah, but is that position fair? And is that position accurate? And is it fair for us to say that the guy is a war criminal?" And it's somewhat, you know, it's touching when a war criminal son tells his dad that he loves you before he dies. You know, it's like, oh, is that sweet? That war criminal just told him he loved him before he died.
One war criminal to another war criminal, right?
Right.
Of course they love each other. They're both war criminals.
I guess the catch becomes, look, I think environment creates behavior. I think the environment that the people are raised in drives the behavior of the individual. Like you said, that kid was born essentially without, you know, any kind of coloring whatsoever. It was how he was raised and the organization that he was, you know, moved up in. The moment that you get into the CIA and you get into the head role of CIA, you're going to be doing some pretty shady stuff as your role in CIA. I don't know if you can be a peacenik working in the CIA. And I would imagine as you become president, that gives you a certain set of skills that you were probably going to, you know, use. Like it gives him a tenor. Now the question becomes, that's an explanation. Does that absolve him? I don't know. If that was us that was born into that particular family, will we have turned out the same way? Yes, because Bush turned out that way, and I don't know why we would have turned out any different. And if that is true, you know, like some of this stuff gets to, there's something wrong with your society that's producing people that function in this way.
And the institutions, because you were talking about the institutions like the CIA, you know, there is a psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. When something that you are asked to do or asked to believe is in contrast with values that you may hold. So you take those two things and you make them merge together so that, you know, it is rational and you don't have to live with that kind of dissonance in your head. So obviously he convinced himself that what they were doing was good for the good of the world, you know.
But he may believe that. Like
he may have believed that, yeah.
When there's a book, Blowback, by Chalmers Johnson.
Yeah, I read that book.
That book is amazing. That book is, I love Chalmers Johnson. His lectures are awesome. But there's this thing where it's like the CIA was doing what the CIA was doing because the CIA was doing was right. And that's in their heads. We are doing what we're doing because it's right. The Rush, you know, we're fighting, we're protecting something. And it's like, but who's in charge of the CIA? Yeah, who knows? You know, the president's, like, these are the president's men, but the president doesn't hold responsibility for the CIA, because if he did, the president will get caught doing some shady stuff, so he doesn't want to sign off on these things. And the CIA is essentially functioning in a way that it's doing what it believes is right in the world.
Well, the whole idea of the deep state is that it's independent. The military-industrial complex, or if you don't want to use the word deep state because it's been taken over by the alt-right, you could talk about the permanent government, that it's there and these presidents come and go. And, you know, if you believe, Oliver Stone, the CIA assassinated Kennedy. Allen Dulles assassinated Kennedy.
I'm at this point, my mind has been blown on a lot of this stuff. Like because it's, when some of the coups and stuff like that these guys have been propagating around the world, and the question becomes, well, why wouldn't they do this here? Like,
Yeah.
why is it that this is supposedly off limits? It's like, oh, they wouldn't dare do this. It's like, but they did this, and this. Yeah. But they'll never do anything here if it's something that they believe is against their interests. No, this is America. They would never do that. That's nonsense. That's utter nonsense. They were talking about bombing a boat. In one of the Kennedy papers that was released recently, they were talking about bombing a boat of Cubans, real or imagined, in order to create a pretext, in order to go after Castroing. I mean, and go into Cuba. That is amazing. That is utterly amazing. They're talking about murdering a bunch of people just to create a pretext in order to go into the country. Now, the moment you hear that, if you're a media person, how do you not know that? Like, and how does that not inform your opinion when you're looking at news around the world? Like, how does that not change your perspective of events in the world itself? The Gulf of Tonkin. I mean,
we know they do that. We know they do that. And it's like the House of Cards. I just finished watching the last season. I thought it was awful. But I mean, that's exactly what Claire Underwood was doing at the end. She was literally about to drop an atomic bomb to distract the country from her situation. I mean, it got so insane. It was ridiculous. That show. I don't know. I hope I didn't spoil the ending for anyone who hasn't seen the season yet.
I hadn't seen House of Cards, so thanks.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, but I won't tell you how it ends. That's not how it ends. That's
one of my favorite political shows, Boss. Have you ever watched that? With Kelsey Grammer?
No.
Oh my God, Kelsey Grammer. That is one of the best political shows I've ever seen in my life. There's a scene where he's completely laying. It's one of the best scenes on television in the history of television. That's how good it is. And he's going after the governor because the governor got caught doing something that the governor had no business doing, and these guys are political allies. And the governor comes to the office begging him for his help politically. And he lays into the governor. Now, at this point, he's not necessarily right in the head. He has some kind of psychiatric condition. When the show first starts, he's being told by psychologists that he has a degenerative brain condition, but he doesn't want to let go of power as mayor. And so all of his political machinations that he's accumulated over the years, he's doing everything he can to stay in power. And he is brutal. He is utterly brutal. But in his brutality, you can see politics. Like, it's real politics. Like, I think he's a Democratic governor. I mean, a Democratic mayor. But he's laying it to the governor. And he's like, I do all of these things for the contracts. I need the contracts. And he says, you can't do bad things well. And he's like, it's such a good scene. It's such a good scene. They've only had 2 seasons. And I was begging for a 3rd season. It's so good. It's so good. If there's any political show you want to watch, that. Or The Candidate with Will Ferrell. It's called The Campaign with Will Ferrell. Oh, I think she's coming back. Lauren, are you there? Is there anybody out there? All right, I think Lauren will be back. Yeah, Boss is amazing. Kelsey Grammer, this is not your Frasier that you were typically accustomed to. This is a different animal. Strong language, but you see politics in its most brutal form, like the stuff that these guys do in order to retain power. Yes, he's not quite fully right in the head at this point, but that just makes him more dangerous in regards to what he was doing. Not to mention his political hatchet man that was working in coordination with him. That is awesome. It's utterly awesome. I think Lauren will be back. At this point, we've devolved into just fuckery. So I'm going to check with her and see if there's anything else that she wants to say before we head out. and I didn't realize this was going to go for 2 hours. Cal is coming on in 1 hour. And so that should be a pretty good conversation too. I think she's coming back. Okay. All right. Then I might go ahead and end this. This has lasted for a while. Lauren, I always love it when she comes on because her and I always have really good conversations. I have this bad habit of starting talking to the person before I actually start the show. And she was like, no, just start. We're just talking when we're on. We're just talking when we're on air. So, all right. I'm going to end this. Let me make sure I don't want to miss anybody's chats if anybody sent anything, because I don't want people saying that I'm that type of guy. All right, I don't see anything. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the content through PayPal or Patreon. Balthazar. The Real News did an amazing breakdown of HW's war crime legacy. If you don't want bad things said about you after you die, don't do war crimes. I love that. If you don't want bad things said about you when you die, don't do war crimes. Fair enough. Fair enough. I get where she's coming from, though. I think as a human being, there's a certain sympathy that goes with somebody croaking. But I'm kind of more inclined in your camp, Balthazar. Don't murder people if you don't want bad things to say about you.
I'm back.
Oh, there you are. I was reading.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was moving my lights and I disconnected myself. Do you want me to stay on more, or are you talking to your audience?
Well, I was gonna. There's super chats, and so I was gonna ask Balthazar. Balthazar wants to know: can you ask Laura what she thinks about the Yemen situation? Thanks. And then someone says, Beaton O'Rourke. I met Beto in 2017. He lied directly to my face about why he didn't endorse M4A. He would have been better than Cruz, but let's face it, a gas station burger is better than Cruz. He's neoliberal at best. I also suspect he goes tandem skydiving with Niera. Tandem skydiving with Niera Tandem. Oh, that's hilarious. And he wants to know what you think about Yemen. Oh, and one more thing. He asked, he says, if you don't want bad things said about you when you die, don't do war crimes. And he references episode of Real News Network.
Well, I'd like to read it. I want to read Jeremy Scahill's article also.
It's a thing. It's on the
or his Intercepted podcast. Yeah, because I like him.
Yeah, Jeremy Scahill, I like him.
No, I mean, obviously, I condemn the behavior. I mean, I'm lefter than left. I mean, I'm one of the few people that are still, like me and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate and probably you, Jamal, and Jimmy Dore, that take shit from a fellow progressives about this Russia collusion story. Yes. I mean, now they're trying to say that this stuff that they found out proves that they're colluding, but it doesn't prove anything more than what we've been saying, which is he's colluding on the business interests. He's always been colluding on the business interests, but he did not collude with Russia to release the DNC leaks to influence the election.
Yes.
That was the original charge of the Mueller investigation, and now it's moving along to something else. So if they find something else to impeach him on, I'm very happy, although I would like them to also impeach Pence as well. And I know that means Nancy Pelosi becomes the president, but I would rather have Nancy Pelosi, quite frankly, than Mike Pence. Because Mike Pence not only believes in every bad Republican thing that we hate Republicans for, but he's also a Christian dominionist, like Nancy Pelosi. And when you get one of those religious nut jobs in there, I mean, one thing we can say about Trump is he has no ideology. He's a narcissist, and he does everything for himself, for how it benefits himself. And He used to be liberal. He used to support, abortion and Planned Parenthood. He said, I don't know, I didn't fact check it, that he was against the Iraq War originally. He hung out with Hillary. So, I mean, not that she's liberal. Well, she's liberal, but not progressive. And we always have to make, the distinction. But
I don't think he thinks you're I don't think anybody is challenging your lefty card. I don't think that's where he's going with that. I think I understand where you're coming from. Ultimately, you're saying from a human standpoint, just as a human being, one human being looking at another human being that's croaking. There's something in you. Like I have every so often I do a do you remember Conan O'Brien? Conan O'Brien used to have these skits where he would start a show and then somebody would call in and he would have like the talking head. It might be like Bill Clinton talking about some woman that he's trying to have, hook up with. And it's absolutely hilarious. And every so often I would have a call in, something to that effect. I start a show and then have somebody call in and it might be like Sam Cedar or somebody like that. One of the ones that we were thinking about doing was John McCain's brain tumor. Now, this is brutal. And I was telling my mom about this, and she was like, "Oh, boo." she's like, I understand he wants to bomb all these people and everything else, but from a human level, that just, it's ugly. It doesn't feel right.
I don't know. It's also, what do you spend your time doing? And I can extrapolate this to other things that I criticize progressives about, like I felt like, all right, if you're going to be so anti-war, get off your ass and start an anti-war protest or start a campaign in your community to get people to contact their representatives to vote against this or to vote for, Bernie Sanders' bill. I much prefer people that take action rather than just foam at the mouth and flap their gums, sort of people that just glibly post on Twitter or, on Facebook. Because maybe it's because I'm an activist myself and I feel guilty about just, opining about something and not doing something.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I recognize that most people don't have the time to do the level of activism that I do. Okay. But, they can make a telephone call or, and it's also like what you said, it's the human thing. I feel like nobody's perfect, right? And some people are just bound complain. They're just born complainers. They're born criticizers. He talks about Yemen. Well, I mean, I don't know what he means. What do I think about Yemen? I think it's horrible that, they're committing war crimes in Yemen, that they're doing it with our money and that we're refueling the planes and all that sort of stuff. But somebody said something about Bernie Sanders the other day, that he's only saying that they shouldn't. Now, I may be mangling this or getting this wrong, that they're only opposed to their war against the Houthis or something, but he wasn't opposed to any of their other wars.
There's a loophole in the bill. It allows the bill itself. There's a lot of good stuff in the bill that Bernie Sanders has, but there's a loophole. There's a massive loophole in it where the president or whoever can essentially, if they believe that they're fighting Al-Qaeda, then they can still use military force. Well, the entire all of this is because they're supposedly fighting Al-Qaeda. That's the fig leaf that they've been using for this. Meaning that, and even if they weren't, the president, can come up with some kind of intelligence saying, oh yeah, we got some intelligence that we're doing X. Meaning the president can still continue to do what the president is doing. Donald Trump could sign that bill tomorrow and turn around and say, well, we're fighting Al-Qaeda. We got some intelligence and we need to keep going. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's not to mention there's a secondary point that Trump had already given Saudi Arabia those planes. So Saudi Arabia already still has a capacity to do exactly what Saudi Arabia was doing before. Just this time they're flying the planes. And we found out that there was information leaked that the United States has been using special forces in Yemen. We have been doing bad things, man. And some of the stuff that people are saying, like Donald Trump coming out saying, we're trying to de-escalate the war and all this other stuff. Well, yeah, you're trying to de-escalate only because you've given them the planes. This is a dog and pony show from the standpoint of Trump pretending as if they're de-escalating in Yemen. It's nonsense. I do think Sanders means well with the bill, but that's a massive hole in the bill. Like for yourself, the fig leaf that Obama was using. There's an interview that I was showing with Mattis and Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was essentially asking him the most obvious question in the world: how are you in these countries? Like, what are you using as a fig leaf for the bombing? Now, she already knows the answer to this question, and Mattis comes out and says, well, that's kind of complicated, and Obama had that complication too. Mattis didn't just want to say that's illegal, that ultimately we've been doing this stuff with the fig leaf of this kind of authorization military force for Iraq. Had nothing to do with Syria, had nothing to do with any of these other countries. We're in those countries with a fig leaf of a dog and pony show, talking about we're fighting terrorism. I guess the point that they're making is, well, that fig leaf also applies to Yemen, because the president can come up with pretty much any intelligence saying that he's doing X or he's doing Y and create a justification to do it.
Yeah.
But I give Sanders points for this. I don't fully dog him on this point. I just.
Well, you have to get something passed. And that's the thing about the sausage making in Washington, D.C., that people don't seem to appreciate. It's why I would never run for office, because I couldn't live with myself if I had to make these kind of compromises, But that's what they have to do. And it's going to be really interesting for me to see how AOC and Tlaib and, Deb Haaland and all these other progressive women, these Justice Democrats that got elected, navigate these waters to achieve progressive change. I'm scheduling a call with Alex Roja from Progressive Justice Democrats, not a show, but actually a call with her, because I want to strategize about how they can do what they did last summer. Remember when they did those wonderful graphics about all the Democrats who had signed on to the various bills that the Justice Democrats were supporting and how many didn't? Well, I thought that was a very handy tool to use and to keep kind of promoting. And they're doing it now with the Green New Deal. Like, how many people are signing on to Alexandra's thing to have that select committee? And people were like, somebody just tweeted today, why hasn't Pramila Jayapal signed on? Well, I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. If she hasn't signed on by the time she comes on my show, I'll certainly ask her. But I think that we need to work, and if Justice Democrats wants to be the intermediary organization sort of between Congress and the activist community, that's what I want to talk to her about, how we can have their back, so to speak. Because that's what Bernie Sanders, like this was when my picture on my profile page with me at the podium and Bernie stand behind listening to me, like that's ever going to happen again, right? But this was when he had come out to Los Angeles in June of 2015. And my friend had a fundraiser, Progressive Democrats of America board president, Mimi Kennedy. And I was there and Bernie was there. And I asked if I could introduce LA for Bernie after he talked and before the Q&A. So I did. And I remember in that talk that he gave, people asked him in the Q&A, how are you going to get things like Medicare for all passed when you have, well, it's Mitch McConnell now, John Boehner, John Boehner as majority leader of the Senate. And he said, because we're going to assemble an entire army of people and have outside the White House. So I'm going to be able to point outside the window and say, look at all those people there that want Medicare for all. And it made me think how he was going to govern, what kind of president he was going to be. Because he understands the power of social movements to force politicians to act. And, because he was part of the civil rights movement where they had a activist component with the marches and the sit-ins and everything, but they also had a legislative component. And I remember watching, if you haven't seen this, Jamal, you will love this. There was a series on PBS called Eyes on the Prize, which is the best history of the civil rights movement I've ever seen. And there's a scene in there where they have Martin Luther King talking to, oh my God, now I'm forgetting if it was Andrew Young or Jesse Jackson or somebody else, but they were basically saying that they had to be the one that it was going to be like a good cop, bad cop thing, that Martin Luther King had to be the moderate one, whereas the other guy, which I'm not remembering which one it was, had to be the one to advocate for more direct things. And Martin Luther King was then going to say, well, look, if you don't sign this legislation, we're going to have riots in the street, kind of a thing. So similarly, I think just as Democrats can perform that function for AOC and the progressive, like it's not even the progressive caucus, because they haven't been very effective. Every year they have the progressive budget and it's fabulous. But does anybody in the public know what's in that progressive budget? Did they ever do anything to use the people to help them advance the progressive budget? This is what I think is going to be the difference with some of these new freshmen. Not that neo-lib Katie Hill, who joined both caucuses because she's ACDC. I love that. I'm going to tweet that as soon as we get off that show, because that is like my unique perception on this. Well, of course, she's bisexual. She is going to join both caucuses.
She didn't want one of the other. She wanted both.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's what I think. That's what's sort of exciting me, and I'm going to work to try to make that happen.
Very cool, man. All right.
It's been like 2 hours, so I guess you're going to wrap up, right?
Yeah. Cal from Secular Talk is going to be on at 12 midnight. So that should be an interesting segue to the Justice Democrats.
Oh, mention what I said.
Yes, absolutely.
And tell him I want him to come on my show.
I mean, we'll see what he says. I'm shocked that he's coming on mine, to be honest.
Yeah, that's great. I love him.
Randomly hit him up. So yeah, this is that. Is there anything else you may want to say? I mean, we've been around Robin Hood's Bond on this. I always enjoy these conversations, so I always have fun, and I think my audience loved it. That's been up to 150 people here, so.
Oh my God. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I always love talking to you, and I'm so jealous that you're having the opportunity that you're having right now to travel all over the world. It's really wonderful. And, when are you coming back? Do you know?
I don't know. It's scheduled for like March or April. I have to get treatments in each of the centers that I'm in. So anywhere I go, I have to make sure there's a facility. That's been weird because I'm probably going to have the record for the number of sessions, dialysis sessions, of anybody on the planet at this point from all these different places. But I don't know.
And do you get it for free when you're in a country that has socialized medicine, even though you're not a citizen of that country?
No, if I was a citizen of the country, it would be free. If I was in pretty much anywhere in Europe, it would all be free. I wouldn't have to think about it one iota. As an American citizen, I have to pay. Meaning each place that I go to and get a treatment, I have to pay out of pocket for treatments.
So are you covered by insurance in America?
Yes.
And that insurance doesn't work out of the country.
That is true. Yes. I was in Cairo, and I stopped. I was in a waiting room, and the waiting room is kind of this kind of inside area. It's in that particular facility. And there's a guy who's sitting there. He's fastening his clothes, and he's taking a smoke before he leaves. And one of the nurses comes out, and he says something to me. He doesn't speak the language. I said something to him. He thinks I'm asking him for a cigarette. He gives me a cigarette. I don't smoke. I was like, all right, fuck it, I'll take it. Okay. And I light up, and I'm sitting there, and the guy turns to me. He says, "Do you have to pay for this?" And I say, "Yeah." He says, I'm from Germany. And he says, I couldn't imagine having to pay for this. And it's like in his mind, this is no issue. Because anywhere that he goes, Germany covers his healthcare. So if he's in Cairo, if he's in any of these other places, his healthcare for the most part is covered. Mm. You talking about jealous?
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about jealous.
Yeah.
In Portugal, same thing, where she was. Everybody who's talked to me about American healthcare looks at me with this kind of like, I don't know why you guys do that. Like it's. Because in Portugal, again, same thing. If you were Portuguese, it's covered. You get top-notch treatment because the point of treatment at that point is treatment, or the point of healthcare is healthcare. Barcelona, same thing. Any of these countries, Germany, same thing. They wouldn't know what a hospital bill looked like.
Yeah, I recommend for your viewers to go, it's probably online, Sicko, which was Michael Moore's documentary, because it goes over in a very, Michael Moore humorous sort of way, the healthcare situation in all these other countries. I remember showing that. I first started working for single payer back in 2004 when Sheila Kuehl had her bill. And it was really interesting because then Schwarzenegger was governor. And so then it managed to pass both houses of the democratically controlled legislature, only because they knew that he was going to veto it. But so we did a fundraiser using that film. I remember it was playing at the Laemmle Theater in Pasadena, and I did moderated a panel discussion after that film. And we had people sign, like every time I do these little screenings with panel discussions, I always have an action item. So we had people sign postcards to Schwarzenegger. And of course that didn't work, but it just kind of reminds me how long I've been fighting for single payer, and Obama comes along and say that's Medicare for all is a new idea. Didn't that just kill you when he said that? Bernie Sanders ran on it 2 years ago, and he
turns around and now accepts Medicare for all, even though the guy wouldn't even put the public option up, on the table.
Right. And calls it a new idea.
Yeah, a new idea. This is brand new.
All right.
Ever thought
I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to tune in when Kyle comes on, and maybe I'll ask him to be on my show. I'll type it in the comments, and you can read it too.
I'll read it out. I'll read it out.
Cenk already told him to call me. I texted Cenk my number, and I said, because Kyle was coming out here for Politicon, which I boycott because I almost got kicked out of Politicon, because they had a Bernie Sanders panel, and it was all shills in there.
Yes.
And I wrote an article about it. Torre, who was moderating the panel, asked security to have me removed because I tried to take the microphone. They wouldn't have questions. I'd been making a list of all the falsehoods they were stating about him, and I wanted to get on the microphone and say, no. And it was really interesting. I'll send you that article.
Yeah.
But so I was boycotting Politicon, but Kyle was out here and I wanted to meet up with him. So I texted Cenk, who he doesn't always text me back, but this time he said I passed it on. So
I would imagine that I saw that interview with you and Cenk was the funniest interview. Which one?
I did too. You didn't see the second one I did.
God, I love that interview. When it starts, he has this look on his face like, God damn. It's like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah, but you know what? Guess what? So I was on Aggressive Progressives a few weeks ago, and I was in the TYT studio. Yeah. And I said hi to Cenk, and I told him about this idea about the Justice Democrats, what I want to do. And I also asked him to think about a piece of campaign finance reform legislation he'd like to see passed in California, because remember I told you about the California Progressive Alliance and how we're going to write legislation?
Yes.
It kind of occurred to me, you talked about money and pitchforks. Is that what you said?
Yeah, you have dollars or pitchforks.
Dollars or pitchforks, yeah, because we've been saying all along, the only thing that can beat money power is people power. Yeah. Well, guess what? In the race for AD 15 between Jovanka Beckles, the true progressive, member of the Richmond Progressive Alliance, and Buffy Wicks, who actually ran Hillary's campaign in California, you could not have a more of a contrast. I mean, Bernie came out here to endorse Gail McLaughlin and Jovanka Beckles, that whole Richmond Progressive Alliance that ultimately won that election. They beat back the Chevron candidates, even though they were outspent 20-1, because they went door to door and they had people power, right? Well, what Buffy Wicks was able to do with all her money is buy people power. She had so many paid canvassers going out in those communities, basically making her look to be like the progressive, when she takes money from the charter schools and the Silicon Valley billionaires and the real estate developers, all sorts of bad actors. Yeah. So she was able to use money power to buy people power. And it was my number one election in the entire country. That was the one that I really wanted my candidate to win so badly, and she lost. But anyway,
that hurts.
Yeah, maybe next
that
time.
Hurts. I wanted, as imperfect as Beto is, I wanted Beto to beat Ted Cruz. I wanted to bathe in Ted Cruz's loss. Man, you have no idea how bad I wanted Ted Cruz to lose. On election night, I was doing the show, covering that election and covering all the elections that was taking place, because that's, election nights is like a holiday.
Yeah.
And he was so close, like running. They had a premise that in Texas you had to be a Republican or run to the right as a Democrat. That's wrong. Like, that premise has been shown to be somewhat of a fallacy. Beto ran as a flaming lefty and did better than pretty much anybody else would have done in that race. Now, granted, like I say, he's an imperfect candidate. I don't necessarily think he's a full-on lefty, but in comparison to Ted Cruz, oh God, I wanted Ted Cruz to lose that race. Of all the races,
Yeah. Well,
that's
the thing is,
I wanted.
I don't think he lost. Like, people said, oh, he lost because he was really a centrist, and people knew that, and he was just all rhetoric and no action. I think it was because, from what people in Texas have told me, that it's just a majority Republican state right now, and the Republicans get their people out to vote, and they're going to vote down for the party. They're going to vote the party line, not based on the policies. I don't know what you thought about Florida with Andrew Gillum. A lot of people thought that, he tacked to the center and that's why he lost. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I think Rick Scott, wait, no, that was DeSantis. Rick Scott was the other one. He bought his election.
He spent Gillum and Rick Scott and Ben Nelson.
Rick Scott spent $64 million of his own money. In fact, there was a headline I read earlier today that said he beat the trend. The trend was people who tried to buy their election didn't win, but he actually did win. So DeSantis, I don't know. I mean, that was very disturbing to me. I mean, that just tells me that Florida has a lot of racists. That was my favorite line in the whole campaign season. I'm not saying you're a racist, but the racists say you're a racist.
So from my understanding, Florida, that may be true. But Gillum was being eaten alive apparently by an issue in Florida. And I don't live in Florida, so my uncle lives there. I guess I could interview him. That there was some kind of corruption charge that DeSantis was hitting him with constantly.
Yeah.
Like some kind of thing with some kind of agent was taking pictures like with him in some kind of campaign corruption sting or something like that. And all
with
of
Tallahassee, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know the significance of it. But again, Gillum came closer than anybody else to taking him down. So
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I know just because he tacked to the center, Republicans always say, well, the guy wasn't hard right enough. If he was more hard right, he would have won. And lefties like to say the same thing. Well, if he was more to the left, he would have won. I don't know if that's true. Maybe. Him being seen with Hillary Clinton or Deborah Wasserman-Schultz, I would imagine that he felt he needed to beef up his bona fides in some way. I don't necessarily think he would have did that if, I don't think anybody forced him to do it. I think he did it because he thought he can get something out of it. They did it because they thought they can get something out of him, meaning rub themselves in this kind of lefty, like, see, I'm not all that bad. Look at me running with this lefty. I don't know. I wanted Gillum to win because I wanted DeSantis to lose, if that makes sense. And he was a better option. All of the races where I wanted people to win lost.
Well, the other one I was really disappointed was Stacey Abrams.
Yes, that was another one.
Because he stole it from her with the voter suppression.
She was outright cheated. Now, that said, I did want Democrats to take the House because I wanted to check on Trump's power.
Yeah.
Look.
Here's one for you. Do you think they should do the impeachment?
No,
because
God, no.
Because what's his name? Nadler is the head of that committee now, and he's like Pete Rubino. I was just reading a whole article. I think maybe it was Politico, about how there are impeachable offenses. Far more impeachable offenses than when Nixon was impeached. But because Rubino ran the thing so methodically and got all of his evidence in order, he was able to get Republicans on board too. So Nixon resigned even before they could start the impeachment hearings. So what they were saying, the parallels were that Nadler could do the same thing because he's so schooled in these in the law.
Matter.
But my feeling is I would want, like I said earlier, I would want him impeached, but they'd have to bring Pence along with him. I mean, if they could bring Pence too, would you want? Because then it would be Pelosi, and Pelosi's.
I know, but there needs to be some legitimacy to it. I mean,
well, that's the point. It would be legitimate.
if
It's not just collusion is not the only way to impeach someone.
well,
You can
that's what I was
impeach him
going
on
to say. If
the
they
emoluments clause.
no, you're right. That now, if it's something other, I don't like the Trump and Russia stuff. Meaning, I don't like the collusion stuff. If it's something that they catch Trump on that's not collusion, then I don't care. Like, I think there's certain issues where it's going to rip the country apart. I do think that's going to take place, especially if they try to extricate Trump from that office. I think you're going to have a significant percentage of this country that flips out. I honestly, and it may be above board, meaning they may actually have him dead to rights on either some kind of business deal, on emoluments clause, because the emoluments clause is a big deal to me. I don't like this idea of the business interest. Trump didn't show his taxes to the public. He should have shown his taxes, because you need to see if there's any kind of business relationship that can create issues with the president of the United States. I didn't like it when Clinton was working for the Clinton Foundation and at the same token taking money from these various governments. I thought that was a horrible conflict of interest. I think the same thing is true for Trump and these business deals. So if they have them dead to rights, fair enough, but there will be consequences for that. There will be consequences. We should not be, not pretend that that's just people going to be okay with that.
Right. Well, at first somebody had some sort of poll, like, do you think the Democrats should concentrate on impeaching for the next 2 years, or do you think they should concentrate on doing things for the American public? So of course I put doing things for the American public. But now I realize that's a false binary, because they can do both.
They can do both.
I mean, Gerald Nadler can concentrate on impeachment, and AOC and Pramila Jayapal and Ro Khanna can concentrate on things for the American public.
Yeah.
Right? They got enough people there. They could do both.
It's my fear of this, though, is if they do impeachment, they're not going to do both. The impeachment is going to subsume everything else. It's like, when Obama was trying to pass Obamacare,
what it might consume is the media. It might consume the media attention 100%, but that doesn't mean that the stuff that I was talking about behind the scenes can't go on, with the progressive legislators getting their public to, lobby.
No, that's true. That part is true.
And then, what you've done is you've built a movement for the next administration that comes in. You've primed the pump, you've gotten everybody ready. So then when you get them out, either by election or by impeachment, you now have all these bills ready to go, and you've already educated the American public. You've already let the representatives know this is what their constituents want, and that's how you do it.
I don't think it's going to be as clean as that. That's my only concern. Like, I think there will be consequences. Like the Trump and Russia stuff. The Trump and Russia stuff has consequences. Like, when Trump might have been more conciliatory when he first got into office, but just reflexively pushing back against the Russia stuff, he's become more hawkish. I mean, he's giving support to Nazis in the Ukraine, pulling out of the ballistic missile treaty, putting John Bolton in these positions, even willing to go to war over Idlib. I mean, he's this band of terrorists in Syria. It's like 50,000 terrorists based on the UN numbers. And he's willing to essentially, throw the gauntlet down in order to protect these guys.
See, they shouldn't have gotten rid of Bannon. That's identity politics.
That's true.
They got rid of Bannon on Charlottesville. He was a white supremacist. They wanted to get rid of him. And they finally got rid of him after the Charlottesville thing. But in reality, he was the one who was the non-interventionist.
Yeah.
He was the one keeping, there goes my other light. I think my lights are trying to tell me that I should end this show. Right? Am I right about Bannon?
I think you're right. And so I've heard Bannon give speeches. Bannon is terrifying because Bannon says things that lefties would agree with, but it's faux left. Like, there's stuff hiding in that closet. But the way he talks, there was some speech that Bannon gave where you're listening to it, you're like, yeah, what Bannon just said there is correct. And unfortunately, that's terrifying, because if I'm listening to that and I'm thinking that's correct, that is going to be applicable to a lot of people. Like when he was talking about, he says, We have serfdom class from kids. Kids don't have any futures in this country. We need to do something for them. Capitalism needs to show the benefits to the rest of the public, not just to super rich. And even when he was talking, I think it was like the Bill Maher, he was making these arguments of, look, I wanted to have, essentially, these were somewhat lefty, faux left policies to give back to various parts of the population and pull people into the political space. Same thing that's taking place with the 5-star movement in Italy, where these guys are, I think they're trying to give like a living wage or trying to give money to the unemployed or something to that effect, or give like a basic income. But these guys are hard right wingers. You know, it's like this weird merger of these two policies, this kind of, okay, I'm going to give this lefty stuff only to get you hooked, but I'm doing this hard right stuff and you're going to let me do
it's populism.
that.
It's populism. I mean, that's what everybody said. You know, we were ready for a populist revolution, and it was either going to be, you know, left wing Bernie Sanders or right wing Donald Trump. So, yeah, I mean, the people, that's why Bernie Sanders can win over a lot of these Trump supporters. And that's why he needs to be, you know, drafted to be the president, to run for president. And that's why your viewers need to watch my show with Rich Peltier, who is one of the 4 main organizers of Organizing for Bernie. I had him on my show last week, and I actually asked him a lot of tough questions about the campaign, 2016 campaign, that a lot of organizers, super volunteers had issues with the campaign, and, you know, some new problems that Bernie is going to have running in 2020, such as, you know, the fact that a lot of neolibs have taken over, have co-opted parts of his platform. So it's a really interesting show. And if anybody wants to try to assure that Bernie Sanders runs, then they need to get involved with that movement. Organizingforbernie.com.
All right. Laura Steiner, guys. This is Robust Opposition. Check her show out. I've watched part of that. I had the opportunity to watch part of that today because I was curious to see what he was going to say as you were going through some of the dialogue or some of the questions with him.
Yeah, I'll put the link in the comments so people can watch it.
That works.
Lauren,
right. Oh, I so appreciate you coming on. Thank you.
Well, you're lucky I didn't have anything else to do today because I got to sit with you for over 2 hours. Leisurely pace. And you and I could probably talk like with that guy from Denmark. We could probably talk another 2 hours, but you need to rest your voice.
Well, I had Joe Firestone on here. Him and I think we went for like 4 hours. Like it was some insane amount of time. His wife comes in and was like, all right, Joe, you need to pack it up.
Yeah. Well, anyway, rest your voice because you got Kyle coming on, what, in 20 minutes?
In 20 minutes, yeah.
All right. Have a good time. Enjoy your trip, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Absolutely. All right,
guys. Bye, guys.
Laura Steiner, guys.
Lauren, you got to get my name right.
Lauren Steiner.
Yes.
What am I calling you, Laura?
You always call me Laura, yeah.
For whatever reason, I want to call you Laura. Lauren Steiner. Check her show out. It's Robust Opposition, but it's on YouTube as Lauren Steiner.
Exactly. All right. Bye, guys.
All right. Thanks, guys. All right, guys. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support through PayPal or Patreon. Cal will be up in 20 minutes. Thanks all.